Welcome to What If I Don't Like It? I'm your host, KT Baldassaro. This episode, we're talking with cinephile, creator, and editor of Trashwire.com, Alexis Gentry, about the 2014 horror mystery, It Follows. Welcome to episode 19. Like you just heard, we're talking with creator and editor of Trashwire.com, Alexis Gentry, and we're talking about the 2014 movie, It Follows. I am so excited to have this conversation and to get to share it with you guys. It was really fun. I met her through TikTok and through social media and us just liking each other's videos back and forth. You may have heard me teasing on another episode that I went on their show and we talked about the MPAA and the rating system in America. Well, I've brought her on here so that you guys can get to listen to the great conversation that we have. She's very easy to talk to and incredibly knowledgeable. Like I said, creator and editor of Trashwire.com, you should really go to that website. It's got movie reviews, the Whatcha Watchin' podcast, which is what I was part of, TV recaps, pop culture commentary, and so much more. And really do follow them on Instagram and on TikTok. It's Trashwire across all of those things. Letterboxd too. You're going to find this in the liner notes. Very simple, good branding like that. I love it. It makes it easy to follow them and get their content. She's been called a dynamic, talented, and unique voice in pop culture by Ben Lyons of E! And with her strong fascination with entertainment and her penchant for writing, it's really not hard to see why. And when you listen to this episode, you're going to listen to why, because we don't have visual. I prefer to do an audio-only podcast. Maybe next year we'll start putting in visuals. But right now you're going to listen to why. But before we get to that, I do have to do that damn housekeeping that happens at the beginning part here. I will try and make it very, very quick. I do have a very, very interesting and exciting announcement, which is that I am now a permanent part of Movie Night Extravaganza. I have been guest hosting and coming on as a just guest for about maybe 2 years now, and I love doing that. Getting called in last minute or being asked a couple days ahead, whatever, I'm always down to clown with those guys, and they have officially asked me to clown every week. So if you're listening to this and you want to get a little dose of my voice weekly, well, bless your heart, and you now can. Tuesdays, live on YouTube, roughly around 8 p.m., unless there's something specific with the guest because they're in a time zone difference, in which case you really should be following Movie Night Extravaganza, or even just myself, Movie Runtime, on TikTok, on Instagram, on YouTube. They're Movie Night Extravaganza on all of those platforms. If you follow me, you can find them. They'll tell you if there's going to be a change in the time, but mostly every Tuesday at 8 p.m., and that's Eastern Standard U.S. time, you can put on YouTube and you will see my visage. And I will talk to you about a different film, along with my friends Conan Neutron, Christina Oakes, and Forrest Miller, as well as a different guest weekly. I'm so excited about this, and the very next episode, the first one that I will be on to kick off this permanent hosting job, will be Tuesday, September 3rd, and they said I can pick the movie, and they asked me to pick a horror movie that had a deep meaning to me or influenced me as a filmmaker. And when I found out that they had not yet covered Ravenous, starring Robert Carlyle and Guy Pearce, well, I had to say, we're doing Ravenous! It's also a female director. If you want to know more, well, you're going to have to join in. And that's really where I'm going to cut it for the plugs for me at the beginning. There'll be more at the end, but let's keep it short. Let's get right in there. We've got a great episode. We talk about tons of interesting stuff beyond just It Follows the movie. Obviously, we go through their top 4, which very unique, very fun top 4, strangely wound up all being musical related, which will tie into an episode I will be doing shortly with Taylor of Taylor Complains. Both of us hate musicals. We're gonna try and find a horror musical that doesn't make us want to peel our skin off. I don't know, guys. I just don't know. But I do know about these top 4. They're wonderful. You can see them in the liner notes, and you can hear us talk about each one and why they're fantastic. We also talk about TikTok, short form information, how this type of video review and critique has kind of changed the way that we get information, changed the way that we grow as people who are trying to make a comment or critique on film, not just someone who's trying to be like, hey, I watched this thing. They have a degree in film. They're more than qualified to be talking about this stuff, and putting it into this new young format it's worth talking about, and boy, do we. We also talk about the nostalgia of certain types of films and how you can get caught liking something that might be hard to defend just because you watched it a lot as a kid. See also why Alan Menken has such a stronghold on our entire generation. And we get into kind of the nitty-gritty about what is horror for some people, because this is an episode about someone who has been hesitant to watch a horror movie. I know that we had Lauren on who wanted to talk about torture, who had made to talk about this subject and did a wonderful job on torture porn, but we're kind of going more into, we have someone who doesn't really generally gear towards horror, knows that this is a good movie, has been told by their friends to watch this movie, but just needs a little bit of context and a push. And we'll see how that goes. And kind of like how the subject matter can really make you think something is maybe dark sci-fi versus horror, when it's kind of like dark sci-fi horror. There's a lot that we cover in this episode, and we're two millennials, about the same exact age, just trying to make content creation while staying true to our love of TV and film. So join us as we do just that, and we pick apart the 2014 It Follows.
This thing, it's gonna follow you.
Welcome to episode 19. We are joined by Alexis Gentry of Trashwire to talk to us today about a movie that I really like, but obviously she has not yet seen, It Follows.
I'm super excited. I'm like very much looking forward to this because I feel like if I'm going to get horror movie recommendations, I feel like you are the person to get those horror movie recommendations from. So very excited.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I have a lot of people in my life who are not horror people, who are like very, very against it. So I always know how to kind of temper and expect and like pick a movie that might be better. Like, I'm never gonna make someone like you watch a Terrifier or like Last House on the Left.
Totally. I'm like, ease me into this. I'm a wuss when it comes to horror. So pick something that you would pick for like a 14-year-old.
Ooh, well, the amount of sexual implications in this might be too much for a 14-year-old, in my opinion. But it does have a lot of like that kind of teenage vibe to it. It's got a lot of Carpenter in it. How do you feel about John Carpenter?
I feel pretty good about John Carpenter. The Thing is like one of my favorites. So like down with that.
Fuck yes. Fuck yes. It's got a very Carpenterian soundtrack,
Ooh, nice.
which really drives a lot of why I find it very compelling.
Awesome.
As well.
Very cool.
But before we get into the nitty gritty of It Follows, let's talk about you, who you are, and what you do. We'll start off by how I met you. You are another one of my friends that I have met through TikTok and Instagram. We just had Brandon on, Brandon White, talking about Jingle All the Way, which was a movie I would have never picked and was incredibly fascinating.
That's so great. Yeah, I feel like the sort of like friends I've made from like film TikTok have just been so great because you just like people really are just talking about their passions, and there'll be somebody who's really into horror movies or somebody who's really into classic Hollywood or somebody who's really into whatever. Mm-hmm. And they'll just deep dive on something or just make a video that's like, here's a movie that you probably haven't thought of in 25 years. And you're like, damn, I got to track that down and watch that. That was really good. Or they'll make a really compelling argument for something. I feel like the sort of circles of film TikTok have just become people telling you things they're passionate about. And I'm way down with that. I love stuff like that.
Oh yeah. It's kind of like wandering into a room in a party where usually people are sitting down around a bong and they're just like telling you about shit that they are passionate about. And I'm always here to be like, yeah. Oh, I want to let your freak flag fly.
Totally. It's so true. It's like, I just like, like it could be something that I have no interest in, but if somebody, is really, really fired up about it, I want to hear about it. And suddenly I'll be like, clicking through 5 of their videos for like a movie that I've never even seen, that I have no interest in, that I'm not going to ever watch, but that I really want to hear them talk about it because they're just really, really into it. And it's very compelling.
Oh my God, yes. I would be like, yeah, okay, totally. Let's talk about how the taxonomy of the red panda varies from what you would think. Like, let's do it. Give me graphs.
Completely, completely.
And even still, some people will wind up doing something truly strange, which is they'll tell me something about a director or actor I adore and thought I had fully known everything about, and been like, wait a minute, Michael Shannon is in a horror movie from when that I never heard of? How?
Oh, that's always fun when a subject that you're like, yeah, I've got this. I basically have like a PhD in this. And then somebody will come and be like, did you know? And you're like, that's not true. And then you give it a quick Google and you're like, oh man, like there's this whole section of this that I didn't know that I learned from some person on TikTok. It's like amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have a friend who might be listening to this. If it is, hi Conan. Uh, he was on several episodes, our network episode and our Moonstruck episode.
Nice.
And he talks about really hating receiving information via short form video. He much prefers receiving it via just reading it. And I feel like both are completely valid. But
True.
I do love nugget information. Maybe it's because I'm suddenly on TikTok finally that this is getting to me.
It's true. I find that I feel like TikTok and Threads have become these places where I just end up talking about movie stuff a lot. And I love, scrolling through TikTok and seeing other people talking about movies, finding weird little, did you know this fun fact kind of things. And then I'll find a lot of things like that on Threads too. There's like however my algorithm is working on Threads, it's giving me tons of really good like film memes and content like that where I'm like, oh, I didn't know this thing. Or, here's again, it's basically like the text version of my TikTok feed. So I'm really enjoying that.
True. It does feel like, are you familiar with Star Trek Next Generation?
A little bit.
Are you familiar with the episode about the Temerians where Picard goes to that planet and that one alien can only speak in phrases and they don't understand what he means?
The Darmok and Jalad.
Yeah, Shaka when the walls fell. Thank you. This TikTok community feels like I finally found my group of Temerians where like I barely need to say anything cogent to anyone else. And
completely.
They have got it.
Yeah, that's how I've been feeling with all the Christopher Nolan and Whole Foods thing, where it's like seeing the Christopher Nolan and Whole Foods memes. I'm like, the way that it would take me an hour to explain this to like my mom, if she was like, why are you laughing at this thing? And I'm just cracking up at all the Christopher Nolan and Whole Foods memes. And I just want to be like, I'm too far down the rabbit hole. I can't explain how we got here, but I'm really enjoying it.
Yes, no, I've gone completely mad and I'm enjoying every moment of being this mad.
Completely. It's like, this is just this weird language that no one would understand outside of here. And then you're like, the internet, where we build these weird communities based on memes and common things that like people who are not chronically online would be like, I have no frame of reference for this. I don't know what this is. Like, I don't know why you're entertained by this.
And it kind of helps me feel like I'm staying young, because I think a lot of slang and stuff that gets new is attributed to younger people. Like, you'll never catch me saying no cap or bussin'. I'm still not entirely sure when or where to use bussin'.
Totally.
But I will partake in current like meme trends and things like that. I will participate in the social currentness.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I've been Olympics memes. There were so many of those. And I feel like that's so funny because it's this period of time where everybody is on the exact same memes. We're all like down with it. We all understand it. And like next month, everyone will be like, oh, wow, those are ancient memes. They'll feel so dated because it's just such a period of time that disappears immediately. And I love the like fast pace of it where you almost want to be like, I'm going to bring back this really old meme that no one cares about just to like as a throwback from a whole month ago,
Yes, I think anytime something truly ancient in memery comes back, like when they do the swinging jack and what the woman's name is in the Titanic, where they're like both holding it, like, or when Shaq is wiggling with the cat, like anytime they want to bring those ones back, I'm fine. They're ancient.
Totally. Exactly. It's like, you got to love a classic meme at some point, our internet history from a whole like 4 years ago or something.
It's like classic Hollywood, except classic internet.
Exactly.
So what got you started on this whole journey of talking about your opinion online in front of people.
Yeah. So I initially I started trashwire.com when I was in high school. And initially I started it because I was going to make these little kind of like, I was trying to make like digital short kind of things. I ended up only making like one. And I just was like, well, what am I going to call this? Where am I going to put it? So my friends and I were kind of like, well, what should we make this? We ended up just I was like, I'm going to call it Trashwire. I got the domain name. I was like, I'm going to learn how to build a website. I'm going to learn how to do all these things. And it's that's sort of been the way that it's worked ever since then. So it started out as kind of like a blog. Then I started to review movies. And then when I was in college, I majored in film theory. So I would review a bunch of movies and talk about them on there. And then as the internet kind of evolved, I was like really active on Twitter back when it was Twitter and it was not the worst place in the world. And then when TikTok happened, I was kind of like, this might be a fun place to talk about movies because I kept seeing movie content on there and I thought I should put something on there. So it was kind of just me telling myself rather than just write a blog post, like just turn your phone around and record a quick video. And then I just started getting really into it. And I really I was like, how can I review a movie in like 60 seconds or less? And that became my sort of challenge to myself was, can I do something that is like informative and also really brief, but also kind of entertaining? So I was like, how can I do this? And then I try to keep all my videos under like 2 minutes. Just because I find that I'm like, I think I can probably say everything I need to say in about that amount of time. But I do feel like there's some where I'm like, man, I need to go a little bit longer on this. And that's where, like with my podcast, I'm like, if I really want to go in depth on something, I do have a podcast called What You Watchin' where I can do all that. And you were a guest on there, which was so much fun. I loved talking to you about the rating system. That's like, I love that topic anyway. When I saw your videos, I literally like could not DM you fast enough to be like, do you want to be on my podcast? This is so cool. I love this so much. You know, like I just was like immediately jumped on that. So.
Yeah. Well, I'm super glad that you did because it was super, super fun to be on there. I do enjoy that like middle ground of like 30 minutes. I seem to have and this is true if you ask me to run or walk. I will walk at a pace that is a New York City person pace. I grew up in New York City. If you ask me to run, I will sprint like we are in the Olympics. I have no in between. So I will either do TikTok length videos or 4-hour-long podcasts.
Oh, totally. It's really hard to get like when you're super into something, it's so hard to cut it short where like I did an episode recently with my friend that was all about this Indian movie that I was like, well, I could talk about this for 7 hours. So I have to consciously make myself like be more concise about this because I want to talk about the entire history of this director and all these things and this actor's entire career. And I was like, okay, let's try to rein it in a little bit, you know, which was a challenge. But then with TikTok, I'm like, okay, let me just blaze through this really quickly. Let me just say all my things that I need to say and get all these points across and do all this really fast. So it's true. It is hard, like where you're like, I'm either going to speed through this and really give you just the top level stuff, or we're going to get really, really in depth, you know?
I know. My first couple of TikToks, I tried to talk faster than I normally talk to deal with the limited time. And you can see me like almost hyperventilating because I'm like, I don't know when to breathe in this sentence. And now I'm just like, just fucking talk, okay?
Totally. Yeah, I feel like if I went back and watched my early TikToks, I would be like, oh no, these are so cringe. Because you just like, the evolution of that is so fast that like 3 videos later, you've completely changed like your entire setup. You've got like a different microphone. And you're like, man, I have evolved like 10 years in like 4 videos, you know?
I de-aged 5 in like one video. I hadn't gotten my lighting right yet. And
Totally.
to credit, it is my highest watch video on my entire profile by like 80,000 people have seen my review of Piggy. And people think that I did that because I wanted to look like the main character, like I was cosplaying the main character. And I'm
you're
like,
no.
no.
Yes, it was in theme. That's why. It wasn't just my lighting was off. I was doing this very intentionally.
I hadn't brushed my hair. I hadn't done the makeup thing yet. I had just run on the treadmill.
Oh, I feel like it's such a curse too. Inevitably, whatever, like if you throw together a TikTok really quickly and you're like, well, I really don't like how I look in this one. Inevitably, that will be the one that like takes off and does really well. Like guaranteed. If I do one where I'm like, my lighting is good, my sound is good, my lipstick is on point, no one's going to watch that video. But if it's something where it's super wonky and my eyeliner's all uneven, oh, definitely that will be the one that everybody sees.
Oh yeah. And like I'm an actress, so half of me putting myself out there on TikTok is showing you that like I can do delivery, I can memorize lines, I can look respectable. And like if I put a video out like that, I swear to fucking God, I'll have something like, oh, this video was liked by David Wayne. And I'm like, no, you're not supposed to see me like that.
One. Wait, there's other ones. Watch the other ones. Oh, completely.
Here's my headshot. No.
Well, you got to go to Whole Foods. That's how you do it.
Exactly. So yeah, you have trashwire.com. You're on TikTok. You're also on YouTube. All of the stuff that's on YouTube also goes podcast?
Yeah, basically I do a sort of shortened version of the TikTok videos on YouTube, because YouTube, your shorts are only 60 seconds and sometimes my TikToks go longer. Then I'll do the podcast there. I was basically at the start of the pandemic, I was like, oh, I'm going to teach myself Final Cut and I'm going to learn all these different things. So I did some video essay things there. And then eventually I was like, I should just do a podcast. So that was kind of like the evolution of all that, but those are still up there. Old stuff. I've been on YouTube since like 2006. So like I got a lot of stuff up there that's very old. And a lot of it's just before, like when you would just throw up like, here's a video from Comic-Con, or like, here's a video from this thing. Like you wouldn't really like put it together and have titles and edit it and all that. It was just like, here's raw video of this stuff. So I'm like, that's basically what a lot of my early stuff is. And then I'm on I'm on Facebook. I feel like nobody's on Facebook anymore, but I mean, I have it. So there's a lot of those things. I'm like a pack rat with social media where I'm like, I never delete my accounts. I'll just keep them. And sometimes I'll use them. Like I still have a Tumblr account and no one cares about Tumblr anymore, but I'm like, yeah, but for a time, this used to be so lovely.
I once cared for this. So if we need to, we can find you on MySpace or Friendster.
For real. I wish that part of me is glad that MySpace was just like nuked from existence by accident. Because I'm like, I can only imagine the type of like cringe shit that I probably have on there that if I looked back, I'd be like, oh God, 2005 me was a totally different person.
We used the internet completely differently then. I think about some of the away messages I put up on my AIM when I was in high school that were just like unhinged.
It's so true. It's like, that's basically how like the Facebook status got started, was like, you'd put up like lyrics from a song or something in your AIM away message. And it was that very like sort of like, yeah, this is intended for a very specific person. And it's like, maybe they'll see it, maybe they won't. And then Facebook, that was like how that became a thing. And then tweets, the subtweeting with like, well, like, here's a song lyric, or like, it's amazing how some people will stab you in the back. And it's just that very vague, like, okay, you're clearly doing this for someone.
Oh, absolutely. I posted a quote from Bridget Jones's Diary every night when I went to bed as my away message. Nice. It was, I'm off to Bedfordshire, because I thought that was adorable. I had a friend who for 10 years, until we accidentally wound up talking about it, thought I was so rich that I would fly to a place in England every night. I'm like, Aaron, you never
like,
never
did you
brought
really
this up before.
Like, that's what you thought? You thought I'm like hopping on a private jet or something and going there every night for bed?
I wear the same beat up Jinko jeans every day. This is not a choice.
I'm not secretly wealthy. This is not a thing.
No. So as we start to get into the episode, I'd like to get a better view of you as a film viewer for our audience. And we do that by, I started asking people what their top 3 movies were, because that felt like a reasonable number. But because Letterboxd does top 4
faves. Yes.
Everybody wants to do top 4. So even if you don't have a Letterboxd, you can just give me your top 4. But I believe you do have a Letterboxd.
I do. I am on there, and I'm Trashwire on there as well, because I'm just all the places. But yes, I do. So I have my 4 faves on there. I feel like I don't think I've changed it since I started my Letterboxd account, but I feel like it changes and I just never really like update it. I'm like, sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, I should put that in my 4 faves. And then I just never really do it. But right now, so I have the first one I have in there is High Anxiety. And that's like, it's sort of to me an underrated Mel Brooks movie. I feel like, Young Frankenstein and Blazing Saddles get like all the attention, maybe even like Robin Hood Men in Tights, because I feel like people in our age group, that was huge for us. But High Anxiety is one that I completely love. It's basically, for people who don't know, it's like his Hitchcock parody. So it's like he parodies a bajillion different Hitchcock movies in there. It's really clever and funny. It's got sort of his usual suspects of people that he works with all the time. Really, really funny. And I love it too, because I think like for me, I basically grew up on that movie. So my parents loved that movie when they were like dating and stuff. And it was one that I would hear my mom quote all the time. There were so many things where like well, we have to do this. Well, is it Nessa? Yes, of course it's Nessa. And so all these things, like I would hear quotes from that movie growing up, like my entire childhood. And then it was just something where I watched it a bajillion times. I would put it on all the time. I had the VHS. I would watch it forever. So that is for sure in my list, because I just feel like that movie is like in my DNA at this point.
Yes. Yes. I love stuff like that. I can absolutely relate. My parents met doing a play that was written by Woody Allen. And
Nice.
so I have to say, I'm glad you got Mel Brooks, because I got Woody Allen.
And then you're like, ooh, problematic.
That's problematic, super problematic, but I do love Bananas. I'm sorry. What's Up, Tiger Lily? I'm super sorry. I grew up on this. It's messed up. I'm sorry.
It's so true. It's where you have to like reconcile those things where you're like, I have nostalgia for this, but I recognize that it's bad. Like I recognize that's that creator, art versus artist thing where you have to be like, look, I like the thing, but I have like reasons for liking the thing, but I don't like the person,
Yes, and the reasons for liking the thing are super tangential and environmental. So it's not like somebody said to me recently that they really liked Longlegs because, and then they told me a super fascinating personal story about how they almost got killed by a serial killer.
Wow.
And I'm like, wow, context. That's amazing.
Exactly.
I can't go watch Longlegs having known your life experience. So like that's a you only thing that makes the movie good for you, but you can't defend the movie by saying like, well, you have to have almost died to a serial killer.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's like, I always find that really fascinating when people have sort of the reasons for, I know this is not a good movie, but I really like it because, and it's some like personal thing, or it'll be like, I used to watch this with my grandparents all the time or something. These movies that you're like, I know it's not good, but I do love it. And I have seen it 50 times.
Yes,
for sure.
So Mel Brooks, I think completely still holds up today, because almost all of those movies I go back and I watch them and they're still incredibly hilarious and still slightly deviant. Sure. Did you see the Gene Wilder documentary that came out recently?
I did. It was great.
Loved
just like
that.
So good. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's true with Mel Brooks. I think there's almost like there's a corniness to his jokes, but in a very like sweet, sincere kind of way. Like he reminds me of like my grandfather or something, where you're like, like somebody in your family would tell you a joke and you like, I know this is a stupid joke, but it's really funny because you told me this joke or something. I think there's a lot of Mel Brooks jokes where you're like, this is such a corny joke or it's such a dumb joke, but like the way that he makes those jokes work just is like, you just love him for it, so it's like I feel like you can't not love Mel Brooks.
Oh my God. And it verges on stupidly obtuse shit. Like this isn't a Mel Brooks line. This is a Monty Python line where they go into a castle and the guy goes, all of this is yours, and the other character goes, what, the curtains?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
that level of really literal obtuse. And I fucking like Naked Gun does that as well.
Yes.
I love that.
That stuff is so funny. Yeah, just like corny jokes where it's like it's so obvious, but it's like it's great. It really lands.
Oh God, yeah. And then also like deeply specific Jewish humor, which, you can just totally miss the line. It doesn't matter. But if you do know it, stuff like never give a gribbonitz to a moil, which is a line in Robin Hood with like never give a little piece of skin to a moil. Like, oh, God.
There's an entire scene in High Anxiety where it's him and Madeline Kahn, and they're trying to sneak through airport security. That entire thing where they're going through, no, Maury Weintraub didn't walk like that. He walked like this. And you're thinking of Morris Turtletop, like this whole thing. Oh my God. That's like one of the funniest scenes in that entire movie. And it's just so like, I think about that literally every time I go through the airport. I'm like, You think we're smuggling dope in the celery? Like, I think about that every time I go through airport security.
That's how you know it's a good movie, because it sticks with you in your day-to-day life, and it just kind of transcends even the experience itself. Yeah,
Completely.
I feel like Mel Brooks has absolutely touched what we consider to be comedy as Americans for decades after as well.
Absolutely. And just by doing, I think, what he thinks is funny, it's like, it doesn't seem like there's really any goal of like, oh, I need to, make something that adapts to whatever the humor is of today, or I need to make something that's this. It just seems like he's like, I think this is really funny, so I'm going to put it in my movie. And that's my favorite thing. To me, that's what makes something funny, is like, if you have a person who's truly funny and they're basically just making something that they think is funny with the goal of just like making their friends laugh, it's like, yeah, it's going to work because it's going to be great because it's true and real and authentic. And like, that always works for me.
It's as an artist, I find people like that both deeply inspiring and utterly frustrating, because sometimes I am that person, and sometimes I'm trying to talk to that person. And I've like, Mike Birbiglia is a great example of a comedian who takes the time to talk about how things work and really break down the science of what is funny. And then there are people who are just so innately funny that it's like they have perfect pitch.
Oh,
and if you try and ask them to break it down, they're just like, funny is what funny is.
Funny. Kid. Yeah, exactly. Like, well, it's funny. And you're like, but why is it funny? It's like, because it's funny. It's
funny. I have a friend who is on our I, Tonya episode, Jesse Sterling Harrison, professional musician. And I remember we were living together like 15 years ago. And I asked him a question like, hey, man, I can't sing to save my life. Do you do singing lessons? And he's like, oh, yeah, I find I don't need to do singing lessons with people. What I tell them to do is just listen to Stevie Wonder's Life in the Key of G and just sing along with it. And if you do that for like a month, you'll be perfect.
You're like,
what?
Well,
what? Okay.
For real. It's like, my advice is be Stevie Wonder.
Stevie Wonder. Just listen to him long enough that you do what this guy does. I mean, it's no big deal.
For real. What? Yeah. It's like, is that advice that applies to your average mortal person?
Draw a circle, draw another circle, and then draw a fucking owl. Boom.
Yeah.
All right. So that's your number 4 movie, right?
Like, they're kind of in no real order.
Okay,
they're just sort of in there. My next one, I have Django Unchained in there.
Yeah.
I just like, I knew there's so many Tarantino movies that I love for all sorts of different reasons. And I know like Inglourious Bastards is fantastic and a masterpiece. I feel like obviously Pulp Fiction is amazing. I really love Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which I know some people were kind of divided on that. I think that movie's fantastic. But for me, I was like, I think the one I got to put in there is Django. There is so much about that movie that I really enjoyed. And I feel like, I love Jamie Foxx in it. I love Christoph Waltz in it. I feel like Leonardo DiCaprio, my God, like amazing. It's so funny, and it's really like, it's got his trademark violence, but I feel like there's a lot of good, like humorous moments in there.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. It's one of those ones where I watched it and I remember as I was watching it being like, I'm going to watch this like 200 times. This is so awesome. And there's just so many of those. He does those like big kind of Hollywood payoff kind of moments where you're like, yeah, cheering over something that's like horribly violent or whatever, but in a way that like he understands how to make that really fun. So I think, like, to me, I can't think of a lot of filmmakers who can make something that feels like both like a fun, blockbustery kind of movie and also meaningful and like so clever and well written. And everyone, the performances are all on point, like who can really blend that thing where it's like a popcorn movie, but with substance, in the same way that he does. So I feel like Django to me was like, it just hit exactly the right notes where I was like, this is everything I want. So that, I think, to me, is probably my favorite of his movies.
Oh God, yeah. And like a really great example of how like he's one of the few directors, and I guess Aaron Sorkin is also like this, writer-directors who, even though I don't like him that much, their patois comes through in every actor's performance, regardless
Totally.
of their existent accent. Like you still know Christoph Waltz is delivering Tarantino lines.
Totally.
And that is hard to do or write as a writer, to achieve and have it not feel annoying or stilted or strange.
Yeah, it's very like, I remember, like back in the day when like Kevin Smith and Tarantino were sort of being mentioned in the same circles. And then I think when you look at like what like Kevin Smith movies kind of became, it was like way too much of that. Like you could feel way too much of Kevin Smith in all the delivery. Whereas Tarantino, it's like, there's still all of his kind of trademark things in there, but there's more variety in everything. So it's like, showing the judges versatility while still maintaining your trademark thing and your style that everyone knows you for.
Oh God, yeah. I've got Reservoir Dogs on my top 4 because that was I saw that film like on IFC the year it came out, and I think I was like 9, and it just fucking changed my mind about how movies it blew my head open. I was just like, holy
Completely.
fuck, this is how things can be. And
Yeah.
it's really stylized and yet still totally, each story is its own story. Not many directors can really do that. So whether or not you like that specific Tarantino, I'm sure there's at least one Tarantino for which you do like.
He just hits that mix of like really cool, like filmmaking and direction with like just writing that is like elevated to such a level that you're like, damn, like people just don't write stuff like this. It's so impressive.
Yeah. And he's also a film nerd. So like interviews with him, stuff that he writes, he's very thoughtful about if he's doing something that is based on something else. He's going to tell you like, well, this is really just this other movie where like, you should see that movie too, but this is my version of it. And I kind of dig that.
Yeah, I love he's so good at like taking references to things and making something new from that. And I feel like that's where we see a lot of, with reboots, remakes, sequels. That's like the thing now, is everything is just like a remix of something else. But there's like a real originality to how he does that, where it's a blending of like 100 different references to create something new versus just where you're looking at it and going, oh, I know that's a reference to that. Oh, I know that's a reference. It's not just that, Captain America, I understood that reference meme. It's like, no, it's a remix. It's like it creates a new thing from all the sort of seeds of these other things. And I love that.
Yes. Yeah. I think Ready Player One is another great example of like, this is just a collection of, hey, I remember that sewed together into a story. What the fuck, guys?
Exactly. Yeah. Just where it's literally just that like point, hey, look, I recognize what that is. And it's like, yep. But that's not a story. That's just that you see a thing that you've seen before. It's like, that's not a film. That's just a series of images or scenes or lines that are repeated. It's not that, where's the story? Why is this compelling? Why do I care about the characters? And to be able to take something that is referential, but also original and also compelling. I mean, I just think that's such an amazing skill.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which kind of leads me into one of my next picks, and that is Baahubali. And this is a 2-parter Indian epic from S.S. Rajamouli, who is like one of my favorite directors ever. This is a movie that I watched recently and immediately was like, okay, this is going on my like top 10 list forever. I fell in love with it completely. So I watched this after I watched RRR. And I loved RRR so much that I was like, yeah, I need to find everything this director has ever done. So I went on this big Rajamouli deep dive, which led me to this giant Indian movie deep dive, like in general, where I'm like now at like 100 movies into this Indian movie deep dive. But Baahubali is one where it's basically like, it's kind of this like mythology sort of story. It feels very epic. It feels like, Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings and the Marvel Cinematic Universe and all these things kind of combined into one. It's phenomenally compelling. It's like so incredibly well made. Rajamouli is such a master of like big, giant action, but like with underlying emotion and narrative significance to where nothing just feels like, oh, there's a battle scene for the sake of an action scene. Every single frame of that movie feels so intentional and just really like well crafted. There's things where you're like, well, there's no, the continuity here doesn't make sense because this and this. And he's like, I don't care. Was it compelling? Did you feel the emotion that I wanted you to feel? And it's like, yes, you did. So I think to me, he's another one of those directors, kind of like with Tarantino, where he can take a lot of references. He can take a lot of nods to things, but put them together in a way that feels fresh and original and create something new from all these reference points. So like, when you watch Baahubali, you can see things where you're like, oh man, that feels like something from Game of Thrones, or that feels like something from Lord of the Rings, or that feels like this scene from this thing that I know really well. But it's all presented in a way that makes it fresh and new and unique and just incredibly compelling. Like you get so emotionally invested in these characters. And then of course, on top of that, like the music is incredible. Everyone is gorgeous. Like the entire cast is where you're like, oh, okay. So everyone's beautiful. Everyone's beautiful. Like the most beautiful people you've ever seen in your life. Cool. I'll just watch this and just everyone's absolutely gorgeous,
Oh man. I love that. Oh my God. Yeah. I have not seen this movie, but you have completely sold me on it. It sounds wonderful.
I'm really into those big, like epic kind of things. And this delivered that to me in a way that I was like, I have not felt like this since like Lord of the Rings, just like so checked into a big epic sort of story like this.
Ooh. That is true. That is truly a comparison to make to it. Also, a lot of the things that you're saying about this movie are exciting because you're hitting points about why I like It Follows. It's not an epically large film, but there are things there that we'll pull apart in a second.
Very nice.
Let's get that fourth one.
Fourth one is Little Shop of Horrors, kind of tying in where I'm like, it's also a musical. And it's to me, like, it's funny because I'm not like, I don't really think I'm a musical gal. But then I realized like High Anxiety has a song in it. Like Baahubali is a musical, Little Shop of Horrors musical. I mean, you can even argue that Django, there's a lot of use of really good music in there. So I'm like, yeah, it's interesting that that's kind of all tied in here. But Little Shop of Horrors is one of those movies where I watched this so much as a kid. My mom recorded the VHS off of HBO, and I literally remember the HBO like station ID thing, the little like da-na-na-na-na, like the little home box office thing at the beginning.
You gotta lie on your belly, you can float through the H, fly through.
It's like, I remember every part of this from like where the tape messed up the tracking a little bit and all that, because I used to watch it so often. I knew every single song by heart. I knew every moment of this. I love the sort of like artificiality where it feels like a stage production, but yet it's like a movie. I mean, the special effects on the plant is like phenomenal. That puppet, like, to this day, I'm like amazed by that. I watch this now and I'm like, how did they do this back then in a way where it looks so flawless and so beautiful? And why can't we make something that looks this good now? So it's like, I get that we all want to use CG, but I think this is a pretty good argument for you can get some pretty absolutely stunning stuff if you don't use CG and you just use like really amazing artists and have them build practical things and really think through. It's that kind of movie magic where you're like back in the old days where they're like, we didn't have these options. So we actually have to do it like in camera, or we have to do these little tricks or these little things. And I love that. I think everyone's performance is fantastic. The music, I mean, the music, I love it so much. So Little Shop of Horrors is like a movie that I could watch like at any moment. I could be in the middle. They'd be like, oh, you're getting surgery or something. And I'd be like, well, if you could put on Little Shop of Horrors, I would watch that in the middle of getting surgery. Like there's no scenario where I would refuse watching that movie.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, you got Steve Martin and Rick Moranis. I mean,
totally.
the fact that Rick Moranis makes a compelling lead in that is astounding.
Totally. He's like a perfect, like he's a romantic leading man and you love Seymour and all that. And it's like, this is Rick Moranis. And you're like, you want him to get the girl and you want him to succeed and you want him to be a hero and all this stuff. Oh, tremendous. Yeah. Love it.
And it completely makes sense that you got hit by that as a child so badly. I will either tell you something that you completely know or tell you something that will be revelatory. The writer of Little Shop of Horrors was Alan Menken, and Alan Menken did all of the music for Disney when we were kids.
Oh, completely. That music is like just, I feel like our entire generation, his music is just like in our blood. Like it's like our Winter Soldier trigger words where it's like we hear it, we're immediately like, oh, I'm 6 years old again, you know?
Yeah. All of us can instantly do. If anybody breaks into I Want to Be Where the People Are, everyone's just right fucking there.
Completely. It just lives in our brains forever.
I used to be a circus teacher and performer. Oh. And I went to a school where it was the year that Sail came out, that song by AWOL Nation. Mm-hmm. And every single person in the school developed an act to that song to the point where one year at the end of a show, they just put that song on and 30 people just went and started doing an act at once. Like, oh my God, I guess for trigger war, like if you play that, you can make circus performers start performing without them knowing.
So funny. It's just like people immediately activate and suddenly it's like, oh, here it is.
She's gonna start juggling and our girl's on her head already. Let's go for it.
Like a flash mob that no one even knew they were going to be part of.
Yeah, the Manchurian Candidate of entertainment.
Exactly.
Wow, that is a great choice. I do love that one. I keep trying to find someone who hasn't yet seen it so that we can do an episode on it, but I haven't yet found one.
Oh, totally. I feel like, that's one of those ones where I have two way younger brothers and they're like in their 20s. And I'm like, man, I would love to show them some of these like 80s movies that I'm sure like they're just like they're not in the age where they would have seen them when they were kids. And it's probably something where like they're even when they got older and could see them, it probably wasn't on their radar. So I'm like, man, I want to go through and just like show these kids their, here's a thing from the 80s that is like so amazing. Anytime I see somebody who's like, oh yeah, Little Shop of Horrors, like, yeah, I never really watched that when I was a kid. I'm like, I'm so sorry, like I'm so sorry you didn't get the joy of experiencing being like 8 years old and singing, like Mean Green Mother from Outer Space in your house.
Yeah. But, I guess we can try now and show it to you and have that joy. Oh, man. But Little Shop of Horrors is technically a horror movie. So you do have a horror movie on your top 4.
It's like it's right in the title. I mean,
it's
technically.
Right there. I mean, it's eating people, so quintessentially. So it makes me think, why have you stayed away from It Follows?
I think in general, like I've heard really good things about it, but I am like, I am a wuss when it comes to horror movies. So there's a lot of movies where like I'll see like a YouTube video about it, or I'll have friends. So many of my friends love horror movies and they're always like, you should see this, you should see this. And I'm like, I would love to someday, So because it's people who I'm like, I respect your opinion and I love all the stuff that you love. And a lot of them are very conscious of like, I'm not going to recommend you something that's going to give you nightmares forever, but I will tell you, like, you should see this thing that's really good. Or they'll say, this is a horror movie that's like, yeah, you kind of need to be like intermediate to advanced level horror fan to really jump into this and enjoy it. But I think It Follows is one that I have had recommended to me before, and it's been sort of on my list. I just was like, well, eventually I'll get around to it. But I love having a reason to watch it because it is something that I do want to check out. I've heard nothing but good things about it for sure.
I think it's pretty common for people to have different like levels of spicy with a horror movie, what they're willing to accept, what is maybe too much. I recently saw Kinds of Kindness, and while that is not billed as a horror movie, I would bill it to people as a horror movie because the way it makes you feel like you're having a panic attack, like you're so uncomfortable the entire time, is what I think also kind of happens in horror movies, except that I love it when it's a horror movie, and Kind of Kindness, I had to actually stop, leave the theater, throw up, and come back in.
Totally.
And while I thought it was a good movie, I don't want to watch stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. Where there's those movies where you're like, I can respect that this is well made or that this is a good film, but also like, never again. I'm good. I don't ever want to see this again. I don't want to experience this. Like, we're good. I don't want to feel those feelings again.
Yeah, Requiem for a Dream is a one-time film, and then that's it.
Yep.
You don't need to make DVDs of it. No one should own it.
Exactly. Like, I'm glad I watched this. Great experience in terms of like, wow, I really was on an emotional journey, but I'm going to go like, walk in the grass and look at the trees and enjoy the sunshine and just not be in this mood ever again. Thank you.
That movie was so crazy. Marlon Wayans also filmed the Dungeons and Dragons movie in the first one while he was filming that movie, and his performance is inexplicably insane. And people are like, "Why is he like that?" I'm like, because he was also filming concurrently on the set of that film.
Seriously, he needed like an outlet at that point to just let loose because my God, it's like I can't imagine just being in that. All day and having to just sort of like wallow in that for that long. Like, no, thank you.
Yeah, and then barely sleep and then put on clothes and be like, all right, I'm an elf now.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, yeah, I'm going to phone it in on the elf performance 100%.
Yeah, I don't have it left to give. I don't have it still, in the tank for the elf movie.
With horror movies, what would you say is an example of a horror movie that went too far and an example of a horror movie that was like just right?
Well, it's tough. I think, there's a lot of, I'm trying to think of horror movies that have felt like have gone too far. And I think I've just been I've like avoided them. Like I'll look at the description and I'm like, if it's something that I'm like, I don't think so. But, okay. I do love like, I love The Thing. I love Silence of the Lambs. Like I'm into like, I think there's like dark and weird subject matter that I can handle. It's just kind of like how it's presented. I think like, something like I saw the first Saw movie and I thought it was pretty good, but like I wouldn't see something like, Hostel or something, so there's, I don't know, there's a thing where maybe like torture porn, gore kind of stuff, like I could handle it, but like if it gets schlocky, I'm like okay with it. But when it's just like, and then this happens, also like animal horror freaks me out. Stuff where there's like, any type of animal stuff. I'm like, no, thank you. I can't do it. I can't do it. Like does the dog die? Is the cat going to be okay? Like if the answer is no, I'll probably skip it. So there's little things like that. But yeah, I think a lot of it is just like, now I feel like so many things too, it is sort of jump scare, schlocky type of stuff. And I think that I can handle those, but I get kind of bored with them. Like I check out. I remember Red Letter Media did a really great video a long time ago where they basically were designing, like they were going to kind of write a horror movie on the fly. And they did the whole thing of like, and then, there's a neighbor and his name is Red Herring and he comes over and all this stuff. Like it was so clever and funny, but it was also like, this is what so many horror movies are now, to the point where it kind of, it does make it where you kind of can't take it as seriously. So I love a horror movie that feels really well made, that feels like it has something to say. I mean, I think like Get Out is such a perfect example where it's like, this is well made, this has a point, this has horror elements, but it's mostly just kind of, it's putting you in an uneasy state, but like to really like drive a point across. So I love stuff like that. So I'm like very open to it, but it's like, to me, it's like, this has to be the finest quality of horror movie, you know?
Quite right. You hit the exact line of where my bottom for horror movies are.
Mhm.
If anything happens to an animal in it, I cannot be involved in watching this. I don't care. I can't do it. It
Totally.
will upset me too much, and I can't do this.
Yep. And even though I know it's fake, it's like, it just bothers me on such like a visceral level that I can't get past it. I will be thinking about it for like 3 months. And it's like, I don't want to be like laying in my bed at night being like, oh my God, that scene with the dog. Like, it's like, I don't want to do
I don't need
that.
that. No. And that's why I go to doesthedogdie.com all the time.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah, I wouldn't even entertain talking about A Quiet Place, the one that just came out, until I found out that and they named the cat Frodo, so of course Frodo lives.
Yeah, it's funny when that came out, I had a couple of friends that saw it. And then in this Discord I'm in, we had a few people who were like, look, I'm not asking you to tell me spoilers for the movie, but I just need you to tell me, does anything happen to the cat? Because I cannot watch this movie if it does.
Fucking cat. Yeah. Yeah. So that is a very universal bottom for horror movie.
Absolutely.
I do think that you're also saying something that I hear a lot of people say, where there seems to be a desire to set a distinction between horror as a genre and psychological thrillers as a genre, where people start to say, like, I want it to be more psychological, more dark, more thoughtful. And I still feel that that is well within the horror genre,
Totally.
but it is a definite distinction that varies your spicy. Like, if you like metal music, you might like Judas Priest, or you might like Iron Maiden, and then it kind of just, you go out onto those two umbrellas, but you don't come across on those two umbrellas. So I feel you on that. With It Follows, there definitely isn't anything in the torture porn realm or close.
Good.
I wouldn't put it in that at all. But it is definitely deeply psychological, and it is definitely motivated by an attempt at a message.
Great. Love it.
The thing that I think makes it so difficult for people to watch is that it is based on a reoccurring nightmare that the writer-director had, that is also one of the most universal nightmares shared by just general humans. And that is this like inexorable being just walking at you in your dream, no matter what you do. This, like, you can't totally see what they are. They're just coming for you. It's like a representation of grief or anxiety. And so, like, we constantly see it. So people do latch on to that imagery in this film and get very upset by it. So I will throw that out there. But it's not as bad as like, oh, look at this guy's head being cracked open, or let me put a needle in somebody's eye. It's like deeply contextual. And then it also, you know the premise of it, right?
Yeah, I know there's like, I've heard basically it's like kind of a metaphor for like an STD or whatever. And like so I think that sounds really cool and interesting. And it's like this thing that like follows you and it'll kill you, but then you have to give it to somebody else, which I think is, I like that concept a lot. And I like that as like a message a lot. Cause again, it feels like there are so many horror movies where it's just like, and they're in a spooky house and a guy with a knife comes in, or there's a ghost in the walls or something, you know? So I like that there's a point to this. Anytime there's something where it's like, there is something that we're trying to say, or there's a metaphor at work, I'm down for that. I think that's probably like more up my alley than just kind of like and there will be jump scares and there will be blood and gore, you know, so.
So let me tell you about the top 5 best kills.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Going back to the film that you had mentioned, the third film you had mentioned, the Indian one, Baahubali? Baahubali. You said that you really enjoyed how the director kind of like went for it, but didn't care about like anachronisms and things that didn't maintain a consistency throughout. One of the major kind of like complaints by people who want to pick apart this movie is that there are a lot of anachronisms that happen, and they're intentional. The idea was that it wasn't supposed to be actually set in a place or a time. It's like you're having a dream, so things don't make sense. But if you're the kind of person who picks up on that pretty well, you might be like, that phone didn't exist when that car existed, and what the hell is like and like, but if you let go of that, you can just kind of settle into, it's got very I saw the TV Glow vibes with
Okay.
that like intense driven music and this feeling of teenagers trying to deal with some sort of supernatural je ne sais quoi.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. I feel like to me, anachronisms and stuff, it doesn't really bother me. I feel like if it's like in service of a story, I think there's such a difference between, when you can tell it's clearly a mistake or when it's like, no, but it doesn't matter for what this is. And we put it there intentionally because we know this doesn't really matter for what this is. So I'm like, totally down with that. If it's like, I'm not gonna cinema sins this and be like, actually that car should not be in the same time period as that phone or whatever. Like, it's like, it's cool. As long as the story works, you can get away with all sorts of things.
Oh my God. Yeah, I think the most nitpicky one of those I've ever heard was someone was mad because in Super 8, they listened to the song My Sharona, which and they give you the time and the month and the year that it was. And they're like, there's no way that a small radio station in Bumblefuck blah 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 would have had a copy of My Sharona. And I'm just like, I'm so sorry that you watch movies like this.
Seriously, I can't imagine just watching a movie and your whole goal is to be like, actually, that came out in January of 1996, and this is set in October of 1995. So, did they get a pre-advanced copy? It's just like, oh my God, whatever,
Yeah, but and then at the same time, nobody wants to see a wristwatch on a guy in Spartacus. I get it.
Exactly. Like, that's what I mean. It's like, you can tell when there's like, this is an accident where it's like, oops, like, well, this doesn't make sense. And clearly it was like a budget thing or whatever. Like, we can't get period accurate. So yes, there are zippers and Velcro on this stuff, even though there shouldn't be. But it's like, or you can tell when it's like, yeah, it doesn't matter. Like, we're putting 70s music in this thing. And yeah, maybe it came out in the, maybe this movie is set in the 60s and there's a song that came out in 1973. It's fine. It'll be fine. We get it, Yeah.
And bless you for being able to identify fabric composition visually on film.
Yeah. That's always my favorite when someone's like, there are buttons on this that would not have been the accurate buttons. And it's like, well, unless we're talking about like, Titanic or something where hundreds of millions of dollars and insane levels of accuracy are trying to be achieved. Like, budgets are budgets. Sometimes you got to make do. Like, not everything is going to be the actual, natural fabrics and stuff that they would have had in like a period piece. Like, sometimes we just got to get this movie made. So it's fine.
Yes. And like, are you gonna unhook 75 actresses every time they need to go to the bathroom? We did
real
accurate on the main, and all the background has buttons. You gotta get the fuck over it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there will be Velcro, okay? Just live with the Velcro. Do you enjoy the scene?
I would watch that movie. There would be Velcro starring.
It's somebody who's just like, I drink your milkshake, except it's like, I undo your Velcro.
It writes itself. Absolutely.
Daniel Plainview, the Velcro king.
Yeah. He is beloved in my family. My grandfather's movie that he would watch over and over and over and over again. The only memory I have of him is watching that movie.
Funny.
Is he watched Last of the Mohicans over and over and over again. Like, he loved
so
Daniel Day-Lewis. I mean, it's,
It's
good actor to pick. If you're going to stand somebody, fine.
Totally. Pick like, a guy who's just, a powerhouse like that.
It's fine. Totally. How do you feel about Micah Monroe, who is the main actress in this? It's not her first piece, but it is the piece that launches her into kind of the zeitgeist and makes her the actress that we kind of wind up with now in Longlegs. I was looking at the movies she had done before, and I didn't realize I did a movie with her. I did Labor Day with her, and I just didn't recognize or realize that was her. So she's been doing it for a while. I think at least 2010, but this is 2014.
Yeah, I'm not like, I'm sort of impartial. I've seen her in a few things, and I have always been like, okay, well, sounds good. So no real. I'm like, I'm open to whatever. I have no strong opinions either way about her.
Yeah, good. No prejudices going in.
Yeah, I'm not going in being like, oh, I hate her.
Yeah, her performance is vastly different from Longlegs. Like, you could definitely tell she is doing an affectation and whether you like the performance in Longlegs or not, as an actor, I applaud people who make consistent, bold choices.
Totally. It's like, look, sometimes movies don't work, but sometimes performances are interesting, regardless of whether a movie comes together for you or doesn't.
Yeah, don't give me half of an accent that fades away. Give me the
Yeah.
bad one the whole time.
Like Ferrari. Don't give me the Ferrari accents, please.
Seriously. Oh, although there's something to be said for John Malkovich just being John Malkovich, and like he got King of France and
Completely.
Joan of Arc, and they're like, as you would normally read the lines.
That's always the best when you just have an actor who's like, yeah, I'm not doing it. I'm just going to talk like this. It's fine. I'm not doing the accent. You're like, well, I guess that works.
Well, we'll fix it in post.
Yeah.
I always ask this question with people: what is something that you might be afraid is in this movie versus what's something that you kind of are excited might be in this movie with your limited knowledge of it?
Well, I think I'm excited for I like this idea of kind of the metaphor. I like the kind of something chasing you as just like a thing that taps into sort of a primal kind of like thing that scares us. I think that's very cool. As far as something I'm afraid of, I feel like it's not going to be like jump scary. It doesn't really seem like that. It seems like there's going to be like maybe a few kind of poignant ones, but for the most part, like I would say maybe, I don't know. I would anticipate there will probably be some somewhat like haunting imagery that will stay with you, but I would anticipate that would be because of good filmmaking rather than like because of a scene that will traumatize you type of thing. So that's kind of what I'm looking forward to there. It's like, I don't want to be traumatized, but I want to be like where, man, that was memorable because that was really well done. And it's hard to explain the difference between those things. When you watch a movie that scares you because you're like, okay, I have scars now, or when you watch a movie where you think about it because you're like, damn, that was a really well executed scene and way to do that.
Oh yeah, no, I asked this question. This is like worst case, best case scenario, because if my guest tells me their worst case scenario and it is heavily in the movie, I'll give them the timestamp of how to step
Oh,
over it.
nice. Mhm.
We had one movie with a little bit of violence towards animals. It was Unevitable. It was in
Mhm.
Tampopo. There's only like 30 seconds in it. It's in the context of cooking and eating something, so it is still food, but
Mhm.
we wanted to have that timestamp for people to step
Totally.
over it.
Mhm.
Luckily, there isn't anything in the way that you're describing, but there is one thing that verges very close on it.
Okay.
However, majority of people don't even notice it. So
Okay.
I'm not gonna tell you about it. I'm just gonna
All
let
right.
it be and see if you notice. We will discuss it in part 2, to bring
Okay.
it to light, but I like to let people go in without too many spoils, although I do like to give them one non-spoiler, unrelated trivia thing to look for that's
Uh-huh.
just fun, which is that in the first 10 minutes, like around minute 9, the
Mhm.
theater that they enter is the Redford Theater. It's a historic Japanese-style theater with a fully functioning Wurlitzer organ. It's in
Really?
Detroit, Michigan, and that is where the Evil Dead had its premiere.
Oh, wow. How cool.
So just a
That's
little bit of
crazy.
trivia history. The whole thing is filmed in Michigan, and it was done on tax incentives. And it
Mhm.
was actually a really impressive. The budget the budget was 1.3 million, and it wound up grossing 20 million.
Wow. Nice.
So they did really well.
The tax incentive thing a million years ago, when I first graduated college and moved back to Colorado, I used to work for the Colorado Film Commission, and we used to attempt to try to get our government to give us incentives for films being made here. And that was always a
Mhm.
struggle, was like, but we can have all these amazing movies made here. And it was like, meanwhile, New Mexico's like, we'll just pay for your movie. We'll give you our firstborn children. We'll give you everything you want. So we were always competing against New Mexico as like trying to get people to, but Colorado, we do it too.
Thank God I'm not anywhere near Georgia, because I feel like all the states around
Oh,
Georgia
yeah.
got fucked, because Georgia's just like, "Do whatever you want. Light a whole lake on fire if you need to."
Exactly. George is like, what is it going to take to get you to make a movie here? That's what we'll do. We're willing to do that.
Yeah, and that's one of those places where you can still film non-union if you want to. It's like, oh, the legislation there is a whole episode on its own self.
Oh, for real.
But thinking about this movie, thinking about what you have told me you like about movies and don't like about movies, I'm really hyped because you're saying you like
Nice.
movies that are music driven. And while there is no singing in this, that would be
Mhm.
really, really weird. I am about to try and watch a horror musical that is attempting to actually still be scary. And I don't know if that could be a true thing
I'm
that happens.
very curious how that's going to translate.
I also hate musicals. So basically, I'm just going to torture myself for the evening. But this one has a music-driven background. It's got a kind of, like, vibey, passionate it's a story being told by someone who's maybe a little bit new to filmmaking, but really has a
Okay.
passionate desire to tell this story, and you feel
Awesome.
that coming through, and it's very refreshing. It takes things that we know from horror and that are familiar, but also changes it into a new sort of way. Like, even just the idea of how people get possessed and being like, "All right,
Nice.
well, what if we could pass it back and forth with STDs?" And then you're like, "Okay, finally telling me something refreshing because possession horror is pretty stale."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah, that sounds, I mean, everything you're describing so far sounds very much like something I would dig. So I'm really excited to watch it.
Cool. All right. Any final thoughts before we wrap up and let you go watch this movie?
Not really. I'm looking forward to it. And I just like, anything that gives me an excuse to like watch a movie that a bunch of my friends are like, this movie's great. I'm like, well, I'm down with that. So this should be very cool.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, this show often acts as the reason people finally watch something and they're like, "I don't know, I barely needed to be pushed, but this was
Yeah,
like a reason, so I did it."
totally. Just the nice little extra push that I need where it's like, well, you could just watch this now. It's like, well, it has been on my watch list for like a while. And this is a great opportunity to finally tick that off. So I'm into it.
Yeah, you get credit for watching it. That's what you're doing.
Exactly. Like watch it and get points and all that for being like, and I watched
Mhm.
it.
Yeah, you did the key thing that we have to do, create content.
For real. That's like, I feel like as millennials, it's like, that's basically like, we can't enjoy things. Everything must be side hustle. Everything must be content. Every conversation must be like recorded and turned into 6 different videos and audio clips and all these things. And it's like, this gives me a reason to watch a movie and also it's content.
And also, I can say I did work today.
Exactly. I'm at work right now, everyone. That's what I'm doing while I'm checking this out on Amazon Prime or whatever.
Yeah, I had to binge watch that series because if I didn't get to press on what it was like before everybody else, I'm not doing my job.
Exactly. Like I pretty much have to stay up late watching this movie. Like
Yeah,
this is really important for my brand.
look, if Bridgerton drops at midnight, I need to
Yeah,
have a review by 8 a.m.
exactly.
Somebody gave it to me, and I passed it to you. Back in the car. It could look like someone you know, or it could be a stranger in a crowd. Whatever helps it get close to you. It can look like anyone, but there's only one of it.
Welcome back. This is part 2 of our episode for It Follows, and we are joined again by Alexis. And now she has seen the movie.
I'm coming to you post watching It Follows. I'm really excited to talk about it.
It's awesome. I always do a thing at the end where I ask these bunches of questions, but I feel like right off the bat, we wind up finding out, did you or did you not enjoy this experience?
I did. I liked it a lot. I was like, I thought I would like it. I wasn't sure.
Mhm.
But I really loved sort of the way the story was told. It's kind of it feels like elevated in a lot of ways. Just some really nice, like spooky, creepy kind of moments that I enjoyed. So yeah, overall, I was like, hey, all right, this is a good one.
Nice, nice. Did you wind up watching it on the plane as you thought you might?
I was going to, but I was like, you know what? I have some time the day before. So I watched it right before I left for my trip and tried to take extensive notes because I was like, I am going to forget this.
That's actually one of the questions I have specifically for you. When you did tell me you were going to watch it on a plane, I was like, oh man, I don't know how, like, I guess like, there's a bunch of naked people, but it's not really graphic. I was like, "Yeah, it happens. People watch stuff on planes."
Totally.
But one of the questions I wanted to ask, because I was trying to take notes when I watched it, just that's what we do when we talk about these things. Do you take digital notes or do you write on paper? And do you stop or do you just let the film go while you're taking your notes?
Usually I'll usually take notes after I watch something. So like a lot of
Mm.
the time cuz most of the time when I see something for the first time it's like in a screening. So it's hard to kind of like whip out your phone and take notes or try to like write down in the dark in a theater or anything. So usually what I'll do is after I finish a movie, I'll just either do where I go on my notes app or I'll go on my iPad or sometimes I'll just do like a voice note to myself of like, okay, here's like the dump of all of my thoughts and just everything that I remember about this. And then, I'll give it like a day or two and start being like, okay, what did I mean when I said this random sentence? And try to piece it all together.
Oh my god, yes, very much so. I will do a mixture of everything that I have just said, and you're very right. When I'm in a theater, I am so, like, British to my core, where I'm like, "We must not offend anyone." I won't even I'll bring cough drops that have an analgesic in them when I see a movie, every movie, so that I can put it in
Totally.
my mouth and, like, not cough, even if I don't have a cold.
Completely, completely. I'm like, I want to be silent. I want to like not have any lights on my phone, like even like in the realm of possibility. I want to focus completely on the movie and just be like, yes, I'm going to pay full attention to this film.
There used to be a really cool part of the Cinemark app where if
Mhm.
you had bought tickets and you're inside a Cinemark, you could press a button that was inside the app and it
Mhm.
turned your phone on do not disturb. And if
Oh,
you
nice.
kept your phone in that mode in the app for the duration of the film you were there for, it rewarded you with a coupon off of concessions.
Oh, that's awesome. That's such a good idea. Like maybe have good behavior and look, you'll get like free popcorn or something.
Free popcorn next time you're here. It was really win-win in my opinion. I think
For
they have
sure.
since phased it out because they have this no like Cinemark membership thing, but that was like
Mm.
maybe 10 years ago that they were doing that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I love that. I feel like I'm lucky in that so many of the movies I go to are at press screenings. So it's like, you people it tend to behave. But whenever I do go to a public screening is when you're like, oh wow, like people are really out here just like crunching chips and texting their friends. And there's been times where people are like straight up watching a TikTok video. And I want to be like, you don't have to be in here. You could just leave if you want. If you'd rather just scroll through TikTok for 2 hours, you didn't have to pay the money and come here and sit down and do that. You could just do that like in your car or something.
And like I don't know how bad the date you're on is, but if you're
Mhm.
doing that, just fucking leave.
Yeah, seriously. Like,
But
why even bother at that point?
and I have such good hearing that I hate how I'll be in a movie theater and I can hear all the sounds at the same exact volume. So I'll be watching the movie and then I'll hear the people behind me like 4 rows having a full-on conversation about something, and
Totally.
I just wanna and I wanna whip around and yell at them, although sometimes I'll start laughing at like, nothing to do with the movie because I can hear and people will give me a free riff track for the shit movie that we're watching, so it does work out in my favor sometimes.
Well, I feel like if the movie's really bad and people are kind of going off and being chatty, that's fine. Like if you're going to go see Madam Web, I don't care if people are chatting through that whole thing. They might be cracking some really good jokes. But it's like, if I'm going to watch Killers of the Flower Moon, maybe shut up, everybody. you know?
I lost it so bad once in a movie where, like, 4 people were behind me, and I don't even remember what the movie was, and he wasn't in the movie, but all 4 of them have spent 5 minutes arguing back and forth about who the actor was that starred in Hotel Rwanda. They have landed on Will Smith,
Oh, God.
and I just lose it, turn around and scream, "It was fucking Don Cheadle!" and then turn and sit back down. I'm so embarrassed, but
That's
I
epic.
couldn't let Will Smith take that win.
Seriously, you're like, I will not let Will Smith have the credit for this Don Cheadle performance that's so good.
Yeah,
It is not going to happen. Not on my watch.
like, so many other actors you could have mistaken it for that I'd have been like, "I'll let it
Seriously.
slide," but no. Like,
Seriously. So
Terrence
true.
Howard, maybe.
Yeah. Especially if you're like a Marvel person. Like,
Yeah, because you see, you got them mixed that one time, and that explains how it happened. I do also love the notes that I leave for myself when I do the talk into the phone instead of the record,
Totally.
which are almost like an episode of a National Treasure movie where I'm just like, I gotta figure out what the fuck I said.
Leaving myself my own cryptic clues where you're like, okay, this one just says Joanne. What was I trying to say here? Clearly it misunderstood me, but let me work backwards from this. What was I attempting to say?
It took me 3 years to understand a note I had left myself that simply said, Randonautica serial killer. It's the app Randonautica had they thought that there was a serial killer leaving bodies using that app, and I was trying to remind myself to look up the article about it. That just those 2 words. I'm like, what the fuck does this mean?
That's so funny. Yeah, I feel like there could be an entire like book of just like when you look in your notes app or you look at random things that you've like asked Siri to remind you, and you're like, yeah, this is all nonsense. So like deciphering my own Siri is like just a very interesting experience.
No, especially because when I yell into my phone because I'm watching a movie by myself, I don't crib my Queen's accent that I usually crib for everyone else, and I sound like Fran Drescher. And it blessed my phone; it could not handle. I kept trying to tell it Dostoevsky, and it just kept going 2 jet skis, and I'm like, that's not what I'm freaking saying.
You got to go through the Siri translation of whatever you're trying to say.
Yeah, and so you were talking about how this movie felt really elevated for a horror movie that came out in 2014. And I
Mhm.
think one of the reasons why it resonates in such an elevated way for me, but doesn't quite become pretentious,
Mhm.
is the number of literary references included, as well as television references.
Mhm. Mhm.
How did you feel about we get Dostoevsky, we get J. Alfred Prufrock.
What I kind of noticed right away in terms of being elevated was not necessarily the references. It was more like just like the cinematography aspect of it.
Mm,
So
mm.
just that to me, it was funny. I think I wrote down in my notes something like, like Sofia Coppola does a John Carpenter movie, or something where it's got this really interesting kind of like slow shots, the sort of teenage girl protagonist, these kind of things that felt a little Sofia Coppola-ish to me. But then also, a horror movie with horror elements and then the sort of John Carpenter-y score. So I found it, that was what was sort of elevated to me. At no point did it really feel like schlocky. It felt like, oh, okay, this is like more of like an art film in terms of cinematography and visual. And I think like right off the bat, that I just found that very interesting. Lingering shots in something where I feel like with a lot of horror stuff, it's kind of more like quick cuts, schlocky things, jump scares, whatever. Even, when because there are like occasional jump scares in here, but it feels like they're done in a way that's more, it's like the tension building works better. So I feel like it's got like I also wrote down in my notes, like the suburbs are inherently kind of creepy. Which, I mean, maybe that's just me, but like there's an isolation to the suburbs that I think adds an inherent creepiness to this type of thing too.
Oh god, and again, that's when we hit that John Carpenter kind of feel. We've got these
Mhm.
big shots. So many porch shots really made me think of Halloween, and in fact, the last sequence, they're walking around a neighborhood, and it is Halloween because you can see
Mhm.
on the
Mhm.
decorations and stuff like that. Like, people say this movie is a lot like Carpenter because of the soundtrack, which it does share
Mhm.
those. But like, I really felt the cinematography was one of the places where it really felt like,
Mhm.
oh, this is a love letter to some of the stuff that Carpenter has said to us.
Totally. Yeah. I think it's like, you look at something like Stranger Things, which feels like a synthesis of all these sort of like 80s things, but in a way that like is diminishing returns. And I feel like with this, it's cool because you have something that's a synthesis of all these things, but in a way that's sort of presents something that becomes unique rather
Yeah.
than just kind of like a look, nostalgia.
Yes. And it's interesting the way that they establish some of that nostalgia and some of that anachronism. Like, you could tell that certain people were dressed in certain time periods and certain people felt a little bit less period, which, I guess is less of a thing now because I almost feel like the reality that we're in is you could easily see a 25-year-old man wearing the exact same outfit as an 85-year-old guy now, like
So true.
suspenders,
So
tweeds, the
true.
full top hat.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter anymore. but it does add this dreamlike sequence of like not
Mm-hmm.
really knowing where or when anyone is,
Totally.
almost like a limbo.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. I think it's you see it and it kind of feels like, oh, this is vintage, and then they have the little clamshell phone thing that you're like, oh, well, that's a newer thing. So is this now? Is this 1986? Like what? Like it kind of exists outside of time in a lot of ways, and it also, in that sense, too, becomes kind of teenage relatable in a lot of ways too, because it's like really no matter the year, teenagers are kind of going to be the same. So it's like, yeah, teenagers in the 80s versus teenagers now. It's like there are certain like sort of teenage hallmark things where you're like, yeah, that is probably how teens would react to these things even right now.
Oh my God, absolutely. And in an interview with the director, he pretty much says exactly that. Like, it's a play on the idea that it's a shell phone that she's reading off of. It's a
Nice.
compact from the 1960s. But like,
Totally.
he wanted people to question the reliability of the narration of anything that we're even seeing.
For sure. Yeah, like the cars all feel old, but
Mhm.
then you have the phone, so it's like, but they're
Mhm.
smartphones. And then even just kind of, a bunch of kids that are hanging out and like watching an old CRT TV and things, and you're like, when
Mhm.
is this? What's happening? Like where is this set in terms of time period?
Where, when, and why. And then sometimes the parents are in the background of certain
Hmm.
scenes, but they don't talk and we don't really see their whole face. And I think of like a
Yeah,
dream sequence, like, oh, a person keeps turning away from you and you can't see their whole face. What?
totally.
There's so many reoccurring references to dreams that just keep happening in this. And in fact,
Hmm.
this film, particularly the pool sequence at the end, gets
Hmm.
used a lot when people want to bring up a visual reference of liminal spaces.
Yeah, I think that's so true. It does have that kind of feel, the liminal space, like dreamlike kind of feel. And
Mhm.
that's also, I think, too, I mean, tying into the suburbs, like a suburb at night feels like just this endless empty space.
Yeah.
And I think that is kind of like, even though it's like outdoors and it doesn't have that same kind of backroomsy sort of feel, but it does kind of have that inherent uneasiness to it of those kind of spaces.
Yeah, and that's part of why when I saw this film when it came out, I felt so moved by it. It was one of the first
Hmm.
times I felt like I had gotten a film that, yeah, I've seen liminal spaces, but they
Hmm.
created liminal narrative spaces where
Hmm.
like, when
Hmm.
and where are these people?
Totally. Yeah, it just starts to be where the time period kind of fades away, the location kind of fades away, and you're just sort of with these characters in this bizarre situation and wondering how they're going to navigate it.
Mhm. I really also like, I just love the sound design. Like, the use of the synth
Mhm.
is really, really good. All of
Yeah.
the cinematography leads into, but I love the way that the cinematography and the sound design are so fucking closely related that it
Mhm.
feels delicious. The diegetic, non-diegetic, when things slip back and forth, it's so
Totally.
dreamlike.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so true. It's kind of like, what is the source of this? And then you kind of just fall into this point where you start to hear the sort of synthesizers and you're like, oh, that's probably in the scene, but it isn't. But yeah, like it does have a real kind of it's reality, but it's not reality. It's a dream, but it's not a dream. It does a really great job of kind of walking that line.
Oh, yeah. I love when the TV is on and it'll say something that is literally narrating what we're watching
Totally.
or what
Yeah.
we're about to be like, if you start to look at each individual scene, you're like, "Fuck, this is really, really well thought of." Like, even when
Hmm.
they're playing that card game, they're playing
Hmm.
Old Maid, and the whole idea of Old Maid is to get rid of things by giving them to other people.
Totally. It's great.
Are you
Yeah.
kidding me?
For sure. For sure.
Like, they could be playing anything, you know?
The intentionality, yeah, like is really great. It's like things, I think, there's a lot of those kind of like, well, we threw it on Netflix horror movies, and it's like it just seems very like, well, these are the props we had, or these are the whatever we had. Let's just quickly rush this movie out, whatever. And this has totally a different feeling where it's like everything that's placed is really intentional. There's like that scene where she's picking the blades of grass and like putting them on her leg, and I'm like, God, that feels like such a real teenager thing, like
Mhm.
it just feels like exactly what you would do. That kind of like where you're present and you're scared, but you're also like kind of like you don't really know much because you're like a kid, and you're just like that line between like being a kid and being like more of an adult was great to me.
so much. There's 2 points where that comes in as dialogue, and right when you're talking, like, the visual with the grass, that I found just really like, "Oh my god, this movie's operating on a lot of levels." It really reminded me a lot of the vibes of I Saw the TV Glow, but has more
Mhm.
of a, like, linear, complete story, because at
Yeah, yeah.
2014, you definitely were not gonna get away with I Saw the
Totally.
TV Glow.
It's like a less sort of surreal-y kind of like, I feel like I Saw the TV Glow goes full, like, like artsy, surreal, like,
Yes.
where you're just like, "Okay, I don't know what's going on here." But, like, with this, it's much more sort of straightforward story, but yeah, that same kind of feel and that same kind of like, sort of tension in sort of silence and lingering shots kind of thing.
Mhm. Yeah,
Mhm.
the way that they would make that kind of, like, thumping heartbeat noise and then
Mhm.
kill the sound for what
Mhm.
was supposed to be surprising felt like a auditory jump scare, but I always love
Totally.
when they do that. It does have this, if you've ever actually been frightened that badly, all you can hear is that in your ears.
Totally, totally. Yeah, I think too, just like in terms of the scariness of it, it's so interesting that, something that's just basically like a person walking toward you, I think about like sort of in the hands of other filmmakers, how that would look. And I feel like it could become just such schlock. It could be the cheapest kind of thing of like, somebody running at you or whatever. I think about there's like a scene in one of the It movies where there's like an old lady doing something weird in the background, like, and it's like, in a way, I mean, I get that it's supposed to be creepy, but it always ends up being kind of funny to me because it's like sort of like an old lady doing a little jig in the background. but and I'm like, I think about how this would look if it was kind of that vibe. And with this, it's just to, you're looking and you're like, I don't know this person, but it seems like they're coming toward me. And you can't tell, like, are they actually the entity coming toward you, or is it just actually just a person just walking? And that creepiness, and like then the way that that plays into like intimacy and like not wanting anyone to get close to you and all that, like I'm like, oh, okay, like, so I really liked a lot of the sort of thematic elements tying in with the visual sort of execution.
So you get these visual executions, and then once you start to peel apart the why, because like we said, there's
Hmm.
a lot of intentionality in the story
Hmm.
and the visuals. Why are we being shown this? Why are we being shown this in this way? You start to come to conclusions that, as an audience member, I love to be able to come to conclusions and give myself a little treat, as opposed to
Hmm.
being like spoon fed the treat. Like, no, let me figure it out. I love that.
Hmm.
So
Hmm. Absolutely.
it's so fun, but, like, they're in the beginning, we don't even see anything until, like, minute 12. We just keep having the whole frame, "Where do I look? What do I look? Where am I looking? What is the" you're so fucking everly vigilant that it winds up being quite tense.
Yeah, the kind of tension of sort of an empty frame. I think we're so used to kind of the language of filmmaking that when someone shows you like an empty room and then stays on that shot for a while, you're like, what am I supposed to, like, oh, something's up with this. I remember Invisible Man, the new Invisible Man, I think did such an interesting job with that, where, we have a shot that should be like a two shot, but it's not. But we know how films work, so we know that it is, but it isn't. So it's like, I think that's so cool to have, where just because we understand how a shot is framed is where we're like, something's up with this. There's something in this thing that, like, I can't see it, but it's there just through
Mhm.
the presence of the language of film.
Mhm. It's very reminiscent of what in fencing is called the tactical wheel, where there's a
Mhm.
progression of things. Like you do a direct attack, then you do an attack with second intention, and it goes around until it comes back to the beginning, where the next most logical thing is the first thing that you did.
Mm.
And when we watch horror movies, there's the like, okay, so she's washing her face, she looks up in the mirror. That's where the monster is. Okay, that's our first
Mhm.
attack. Then they started doing the thing where she'd look up, it wasn't there. She'd turn around, it was there. Or she'd
Mhm.
look up, she'd close the door, then it would be in the mirror. So like this progression works great. And whenever somebody breaks the logical progression, it feels phenomenal to get scared
Yeah.
that way.
For sure, because I mean, we're so used to seeing kind of the traditional path for a lot of
Mhm.
this, that it's great when you see something that changes it up and plays with those expectations to do something new.
Yeah, and for you, on a
Mhm.
scale of, let's say, 1 to 5, 5 being quite spicy, How scary was this movie?
I mean, I don't feel like it was great because it was more like tension and kind of like creepiness than like abjectly scary. So I would say like it's maybe like a 3 on like the scariness factor because it's more of like thinking about the implications of this, and like, well, literally, what do you do? And her friends are super supportive of her, but like, how are you going to try to, like, there's nothing you can do in this situation. And then will people believe you and all these other things? That is to me inherently, I guess, sort of scarier than like, there's a crazy guy with a knife, but he's back from the dead, or there's a ghost guy or something. It's like the kind of like inescapable quality of this, I think was really good, but like scary in a way that I enjoyed because it does feel tense in a way that you're really intrigued and you want to see like where it's going to go.
It's the relatability of the language used that I feel also works because, like you said, if it's this guy just doing a jig, like, no, in the dreams that everyone has, which was the kind of starting point for this writer-director,
Mhm.
it's a slow chasing kind of thing. It's not coming at me, it's just walking at me. And in fact, I pulled the data, and in an Amerisleep, which is a mattress company, study with about 2,000 people, or about 50-50 men and women,
Mhm.
falling was the number one fear or anxiety
Funny.
dream, except for in the Midwest, where being chased is the number one anxiety dream,
That's so funny.
and this is from
That's just
Chicago.
wild.
So it kinda
Yeah.
makes sense. The number 2 everywhere else, like number 2 in New York, number 2 in California, is gonna be, of course, uh, being chased. And then it winds up being the same for everybody else for 3 and 4, which is being back in school and then being unprepared for a test.
It's like tells you so much about the way that everyone is traumatized by school that our nightmare is like, "Oh god, I'm back in school."
Yes, yes, and a lot of the scenes, a lot of the places in this movie were, like, stress dream locations, hospitals,
Totally.
schools, playgrounds, and you're like, "Oh, shit, no
Mhm.
wonder I can feel like I feel related to this kind of trauma." Which brings me to an interesting kind of question. I have found, that this film has a level of yes or no based on gender, which is that my male friends don't always relate to the entire picture of this film compared to my female friends. And I think that it might be because this is mostly an allegory for sexual assault and being a sexual assault
Mhm.
victim. Like you said, the
Mhm.
biggest trauma that she has at the beginning is not being believed. She can see it and
Mhm.
no one else can see it. Only other victims can see it.
Yeah, for sure. I think I could completely see this being one where men are kind of like, I don't know, that's not that scary. Like, I don't know, I can't really relate to her, and I think for sure, like I that would not surprise me at all.
A lot of times people say that this movie is, "Oh, that's the movie where the STD curse." And you're like, "Oh, it's a little reductive." That's like kind of saying Sing Sing is the movie with guys in prison. Like, yes, the guys are in prison, but it's more about toxic masculinity and being healed
Mhm.
through art. So like, ew.
Yeah, I think the kind of the like when you said like only other victims can see it, like that's totally that's in there for sure, intentionally in there, and I could see where people would be like, well, I don't get it. Why doesn't she just whatever? Well, I don't get it. Why doesn't this just, you can't like logic your way out of it because that's not really the point.
And it's funny because in part 1, I kind of made fun of a friend of mine who was like, "In order to like Longlegs, you have to have almost been killed by a serial killer." And here I am being like, "In order to like this movie, you have to have some sort of," and but also much like the number 1 stress dream is being chased, more than 50% of women in the United States have been assaulted. It's a much
Mhm.
lower number for men, so
Mhm.
that could really lead into our relatability here.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. I just recently watched Blink Twice, and
Mhm.
I saw it at a screening with a bunch of critics, all of whom were men except for me. And it was really interesting to hear people's opinions coming out of that movie because I think I was very like, oh, I really like this. And I saw a lot of men that were like, I don't know. I mean, I didn't think it was that great. And it was like, wow, okay, I am seeing where we're falling on this.
I have noticed that I haven't seen that film yet myself, but I have noticed that same exact gender bias in the reviews that I'm getting, and it's like, "Ah, I wonder why."
Yeah, exactly. Like you come out of it and you're hearing a bunch of men be like, I don't know. I mean, like, what was she even trying to say? And then women are like, oh my God, I completely agree with what she was trying to say, or I really like how she presented what she was saying. It's like, interesting how that works out.
Yes. We have this character here who is like so traumatized by her existence, and she needs to be taken care of. And like, if you're not noticing that, I think you're just really focusing on like the guy is coming for you, which is kind of fun. Or
Hmm.
when you don't really get good kills in this,
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
there isn't
Yeah.
that payoff. So
Yeah,
like,
that's true.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
it's true. Like the kills are not really like, it's just not even like a focus of it. It's like, oh, something's chasing you. And it's really not about what happens when it gets you. It's just about that something is chasing you and you'll be dead when it gets you. It doesn't really matter how, you know?
Yeah, because if you've been made the victim of sexual assault, this ever vigilant, this like when she's in the hospital and she hears the nurse walking, but she can't know. We never know if the person walking is going to be the person walking.
Hmm.
That constant fear of like, is that something scraping at the door? Am I going to be re-victimized?
Completely.
It's really driving like tension and makes you want to like scream when you're watching this movie. But if you've never been put in that place before, meh, meh.
So true. Yeah. I mean, even, like a suburban street at night and no one's around and you've got to like walk home in the dark. It's like that is probably not that scary to men, you know?
No. No, and then a lot of the other scenes become confusing, like, why do we see all this information where we see that she's not eating, we see that the pool is shut down, which is something that she loved, and she's no longer partake you start to
Hmm.
miss and the film feels long for an hour and 40 because why but you're like, "Oh, no, actually everything is really quite intentional." Even the scene
Hmm.
you were talking about with the blades of grass, because we see that, we also see, Yara, I think is the girl's name, the friend, who overeats every single time that we see her. We see like that the grass feels like self-cutting. We see food issues.
Yeah. The way she's lining up those blades of grass feel very like intentional.
Yeah, there's like a lot of trauma that seems to be happening to kids. And I almost wonder if the message here is not like, can we pass STDs onto each other, but can we pass trauma onto each other?
Hmm. I thought too it was interesting because her group of friends, I think a lot of like horror things or even these kind of like you get these sort of one note kind of characters where it's like, oh, that's the like annoying friend or that's the whatever friend or that's the friend that always does this. I just think about, again, not to rip on Stranger Things, but I think about Stranger Things and how it's like the kids are very like, this is this kid who does
Very
this. This
tropey.
is this kid. Yeah. And I liked with her friends where it was like there wasn't really that kind of stereotypical nature to all these characters, and none of them felt like they were it's very easy when you're writing like shitty teenagers to have them be like, whatever, get over it. So something's chasing you. I mean, I didn't see it. Like it's so easy to have those scenes where her
Oh my
friends are
God,
like,
yes.
we don't believe you, and I liked that her friends were immediately like, well, we're going to help you and we're going to try, like, we're going to side with you. It was like, oh, okay. Like we're not just setting them up to be these kind of like stereotypical, I don't know, our friend keeps saying this, but we don't like her anymore. And it's like, well, I don't think anyone's friends would. I would hope no one's friends would actually do that.
Yeah, why are you friends with them?
Yeah, exactly. It's like it didn't have that stereotypical like our friend went through some trauma and we don't understand, so we're just like we don't hang out with her anymore.
Yeah, God, get over it. And they like texting while the thing is behind them about to kill them. Like,
Totally. Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
hoisted by your own petard.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, I loved that it was like her friend group to me felt very real of kids that all grew up together and like, maybe they're different and they've kind of grown apart, but they're all still super good friends because they grew up together. So
Mhm.
I was like, oh, okay, this is suburban teens that feel like real suburban teens, not movie suburban teens.
Which is, yeah, like we're again, I hate to rank on Stranger Things, but it does hit notes very clear and hard in a
Hmm.
way sometimes.
Hmm.
What are you gonna do? I do really enjoy the way that Paul was included in a kind of like insidious plot line that still if you it still happens to a lot of women who have been made victims. So Paul is still there supporting her as his friend, but he is also trying to have sex with her while
Mhm.
she is running from a monster she just got from having sex. Like, why are you trying
Mhm.
to be that guy?
I felt that for sure, and I was like, "This is so interesting in how this is done," you know, like, thought that too. I was like, "Oh, okay. This is a very interesting way for this to go," you know?
Mhm. Let's just jump right to it. How do you feel about the way that it ended?
I mean, I'm a little torn. I think I saw people online were not like loving the pool thing and felt like it kind of turned into kind of a little it was like a little too Hollywoodified.
Mm,
Which I could see that complaint, you know, that it starts to be it gets a little it's like, you know, it's almost like an action sequence and it starts to be a little like, oh, all right. But I think it works for the story. I think like there's so much buildup in this that you need some kind of like conclusion to it. And then I like that, you know, like a lot of horror movies, it's like, well, is it definitive or is it, you know, I think that's a good way to go too, for sure. So yeah, I wasn't bothered by it. I understand the complaints, but for me, I thought it was fine.
yeah. Yeah, and they do allude to it at the very beginning when they're first watching, they're watching a movie on oh man, and I wrote it down too. Oh, they're watching a TV show, I'll put it in the liner notes at the end. It has dialogue that basically says they are trying to kill the monster, but they don't have enough power, they can't overload the system, and that's exactly what happens in the pool with the electricity. This you know, because our narration is always telling us about something that's gonna happen later on.
Totally.
And in an interview, I think it might have been an Ask Me Anything, the director or writer of this said that, like, because he was basically asked, like, "What's up with your crazy Scooby Doo fucking pool thing at the end?" And he let me pull up what he literally said because he even makes fun of himself. He says, "It's the stupidest plan ever. It's a kid movie plan. It's something that Scooby-Doo and the gang might think of, and that's sort of the point. What would you do if you were confronted by a monster and you found yourself trapped within a nightmare? Ultimately, you'd have to resort to some sort of way of fighting it that's accessible to you in your physical world, and that's not really going to cut it. We kind of avoid this traditional setup for that sequence because in more traditional horror films, there might be a clue that would lead to them figuring out a way to destroy the monster. I intentionally avoid placing that in there because I wanted a non-conventional third act."
Yeah, I think about again like how this would have played out if it was kind of a more traditional Hollywood movie and there would have been something where like, you know, the kids go to the library and look up a thing and then it says, "Oh, it's the such and such demon and the only way that you can defeat them is by blah blah blah." And then they just so happen to have that in their town, so they whatever, you know, like I think about how this would play out if this was like an Are You Afraid of the Dark episode, you know? And I'm
Mhm.
like,
Yeah.
you know, I appreciate that it didn't go full Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Yes, like Final Destination, like, "Well, you just have to die once, a
Yeah.
little."
Yeah.
I'm like, "Wow."
Totally. There's always some like, wait a minute, we can trick it by doing blah 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 or something. And it like the plucky teens all get together and figure out a way to defeat the demon or something. You know?
Yes, and I feel like that is this director's kind of allusion to the fact that, like, this is 2014. I was never gonna be able to make the movie that ended with them walking away
Mhm.
ambiguously unless I put in a little bit of an attempt to be like, "Hey, they tried, but,
Yeah.
like, meh." What do you think about the line when she's in the pool and we don't even need to see the monster for half of that scene, which is so fucking great. Like they don't show it to us. And her sister asks, "Describe it to me." And she says, "I don't want to."
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that's great. Like it's also,
Mhm.
I mean, if we're looking at this as kind of metaphor for trauma and all that, I think like you know, that's super relatable of like, no, you know, I don't want to describe.
I And this is something that so I mentioned to you in part 1 that there's an
Mhm,
aspect to this film that not everybody totally picks up on their first viewing that
mhm,
is a little bit like, "Ooh, that's kinda traumatic." She doesn't wanna describe it to her sister because it is their father who is dead,
mhm,
which we see in a photo later on. We also see Greg's mom as one of the monsters. We're told by Hugh/Jeff that the monster can just become anybody that you know. However, if you actually plot the characters that the monster does become, you can see a very specific meaning.
Mm-hmm.
You want to take it? Did you notice that? Do you want me to just go and talk about it? Like, I'm not
Yeah,
sure
go
how you
ahead,
feel.
dive into it. Yeah, I would love to hear more about it because I'm
I,
like, you're way more well versed in this
oh yeah,
movie.
no. I want to see like if you had an idea from picking up in just a first
Sure,
viewing.
yeah.
Absolutely. I Micah doesn't recognize anyone that is coming for her for like several until it starts to become Greg's mom and her dad.
Mm-hmm.
I What we do see is victims or constant victims of sexual assault. First time we see an elderly woman,
Mm-hmm.
like elderly people in homes are often victims of assault. Then we see a woman with her hands bound, her teeth bit out, and she's peeing on herself. And like, if you're just watching the movie, like, ew, gross. And like, that's something that they tell women to do to try and avoid being raped. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, okay. Then we see at one point in time, it turns into a child.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it is turning into things that it has been given to. Or
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so so there's this meme that goes around that says, people forget that you can easily give a cursed object to a baby and be done with it. And I'm like, yeah, well, did you see It Follows? Because at some point somebody does give it to a little
Yeah.
boy. And like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, that's upsetting.
Yeah, so much darker for sure. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
And then when you
Yeah.
start to consider that, like, Greg keeps saying he didn't see the monster for, like, the first several days.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that is because he's being abused by his mother, and he has passed it to his mother already. That's why when she shows up at his door
Mm.
naked, he isn't really even taken aback by her.
Yeah, he's like not as phased by that as he should be for sure.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
definitely like a much darker layer going on underneath the surface of that for sure.
Yeah. So then it would imply that she doesn't wanna tell her sister it's their abusive dead father,
Mm-hmm.
and that is
Mm-hmm.
so not only are you being chased by something, you're being chased by a previous abuser in your life, like, "Oh,
Yeah.
fuck you, movie."
Yeah, yeah. Which I think to me kind of ties in with um like the intimacy part of this. I mean, it is a thing that wants to get close to you, and if it does, it kills you. And it makes you inherently want to not let anyone get close to you because you don't know what the thing is and anyone could be this thing. So it's like if you do have a trauma that you've suffered, it does affect your ability to get close to anybody forever
Mhm.
because you would be fearful of letting anyone close to you for any reason, like both physically close to you or just trusting anybody. And I thought that was kind of like, I found that really interesting how essentially it makes you sort of shut everyone out and run away from everyone. And it makes you solitary. It makes you, reject any type of like intimacy, both just like in terms, yeah, obviously physical intimacy, but even just in terms of like, you don't want people around you because you want to be sort of in a field with no one around. I thought that was that I found very interesting was that like the way that it changes you and traumatizes you and scares you and scars you is by making it where you can't get close to anybody.
Exactly, and then
Mhm.
ultimately the only way to resolve the story or your problem at all is to let your friends help you, is
Mhm.
to open up to sharing the trauma by passing it to Paul, but now like he is now also infected by loving her. It's
Mhm.
this thing they can carry together. Do you ever play Dark Souls or any games from Software?
I haven't, but I've heard a lot about them.
They're relentlessly difficult games, and most people don't totally care for them. They are a wonderful representation of depression because what happens in the game is you die a lot, and when you
Mhm.
die, you have to go back to the beginning of the level and do everything over again, except you have a smaller health bar, you have less capacity
Oh.
to get through it, and yes, you can beat the game alone, but the game is trying to teach you if you reach out to your friends also playing the game or NPCs in the game using
Mhm.
summon signs, it's much easier. So you can carry your depression alone, or you can reach out and you can beat this.
That's very cool. Yeah, I feel like everything I've heard about it is just that it's like the hardest game. But yeah, that's,
Yeah.
having that aspect of it very interesting for sure.
Yeah, it was designed to help people. There are certain games like even Bejeweled. If you do repetitive tasks over and over again, where you can put things in place on video games,
Mhm.
it actually helps deal with PTSD. It's
I could
really
see that.
really strange the studies that are
Yeah.
coming out. Super super fun.
Just kind of rewiring your brain a little bit, or, you know,
Mhm.
changing some of the pathways in your brain.
That EMDR type shit. And so at the end, I really feel like that's the message. Like the Scooby-Doo pool thing didn't work, but her friends tried. They
Mhm.
believed in the thing they couldn't see, and they were like, "We're gonna try for you."
For sure. Yeah, I was the supportive friend group was I was like, "Oh, I really this feels different and I really like this."
Mhm.
So,
And
yeah.
well written, you're right. Like, usually I don't particularly care for teenage protagonists. They're supposed to
Oh,
be like
yeah.
19, but they're written in a believable, non-precocious, annoying way.
Mhm. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not movie teens. They don't feel like movie teens, and I that's good because, man, movie teens, that can be
Or
rough.
yeah. Did you like Micah Monroe's performance in this? She's about 21. This is not her first film at all.
Yeah, I liked it. I feel like she is, it's that anti-precocious teen thing with her too. It's like she's quiet. She's not like overly excited. She's not going like scream queen on anything, you know. She's behaving very much in a way that, like, I remember my friends in high school and I'm like, yeah, this is probably about how they would react in this situation, you know. So
Mhm.
it's a more it feels more natural, and I thought that really worked.
Yes, because they absolutely could have made her into a final girl and killed
Totally.
everyone in this entire process, and
Mhm.
again, part of why it's so refreshing in 2014 to be like, it's teen driven, something's
Mhm.
coming to kill them that's supernatural, and yet it doesn't final girl? Okay.
Yeah, even just the concept of this as like a thing that you get from having sex, and then it's like the final girl concept is always like, well, she doesn't have sex in the movie, so she lives. I love that it's like, well, no, she has to have sex in the movie, so she'll live. You know, it's
Exactly.
like I thought it was such a great sort of anti final girl, such a new take on that, basically.
And did you know that they are doing a sequel? I didn't know until this morning because I found out that it's in pre-production through my IMDb Pro account.
Nice. Yeah, I think I saw on Letterboxd that there was like a poster for like a coming soon. You know.
They follow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just Micah. They don't have anyone else confirmed yet, so it's pretty early pre-production, but I'm here for it because now we are existing in this time period where we said things like "I Saw the TV Glow" is totally getting received well.
Hmm.
What will this writer-director, who hasn't done anything since 2018, do
Interesting.
now? I'm like,
Yeah.
"Okay."
Yeah, I feel like we're, you know, the doorway is so much more open now to what you can do, especially with horror and everything. So it'll be cool to see where they go with this and what they explore in another installment.
And this film, so well received, it was supposed to go to VOD, but it
Mm.
it it did a premiere at Cannes, which is,
Oh,
like, a
wow.
fun thing to do. Like, there's some movies where I'm like, "The Brave Little Toaster premiered at Cannes?
That's so wild.
Okay." Um, but it premiered at Cannes, and the critics loved it so much that they were like, "There's no fucking way you cannot give this a theatrical release," and they had to, like, reorganize the whole press to make it come out in
Wow.
theaters, but it was supposed to just be VOD.
Yeah, I remember, like, you know, so many of my film friends love this movie, and I have heard of it and all that before I watched it. So it was one of those things where I remember that everybody, it was a lot of positive word of mouth for sure. So I'm not surprised that it was like, well, we think this is going to be like a put it on streaming or something, but it's like, no, no, this deserves an actual movie theater release. This is a real movie. You know?
It's good, it's a film, in fact.
Yeah, exactly. This isn't
Uh,
a chuck it on Netflix type of thing.
do you have a favorite scene and or a least favorite scene?
I mean, I think at first I was a little unsure about the pool thing because I was like, so that was maybe like not my fave. There's like I really liked the lead up where you know something bad is going to happen to her when she goes with this guy, and you know she's going to sleep with this guy, and she's talking about, oh, she used to dream this when she was a little kid, and you're like, I liked how it was like, oh, this is going to be so bad, and you know it's going to be so bad, but it's also needs to be this like inciting incident that gets everything moving. I liked a lot of the lead up to that, and then I thought it was really interesting when he's like telling her all about it, and he's like, it was like, it seems like it's going to be, she wakes up, she's tied to like a chair, you know, it's like, this is terrifying, and then he's like, hey, listen, like, I'm not going to kill you or anything, but I just want you to know that something's going to kill you. Like, it's the sort of devastating nature of that was really interesting.
Yeah, because it actually behooves him for her to stay alive. But if she does, much like Greg, if she doesn't actually believe that it's real, that he's just gonna get fucked in like a week and a half when the thing finally gets him.
It's like he'll be right back to you, you know? So you got to be like, listen, now you have to run and be afraid of this thing. And I'm very invested in you doing that because I also do not want to die.
Yes. That scene has such a good line. The like when she was leaning over and saying that she says, "It wasn't about the drive. It was about the freedom to take the drive. And now
Hmm.
that we're older, we have all this freedom, but what the hell do we do?" And that
Hmm.
immediately made me think of I Saw the TV Glow. Like, what does it mean? You have this adolescent angst, but there's this next phase in our life before we're fully adults where we're trying to become sexual, we're trying to become fully actualized, that like, what the hell do we do?
Totally. Yeah. I think about like, when you're in your 20s and you're basically like building your adult personality, but you're kind of like trying on a lot of personalities, or you're like, maybe I'm like the person who's really into this thing, or maybe I'm like, this is my specialty and this is my like group of friends. You're kind of experimenting with like, okay, what is going to be the thing that I'm into as I'm older? And then, you hit like your 30s or whatever, and you're like, yeah, I got a pretty good idea,
Yeah.
but your 20s is where you are like, I don't really know because I'm not like in school really anymore to where I can say, oh yeah, this class, or like I make my friends that way. And then you have to suddenly have a friend group or have interests or have these things that are just that you choose independently. They're not like sort of handed to you, or you're not kind of like set in a track to get them anymore. You just decide what you like and what you're into and who you want to hang out with. And that can be such a weird period of time. I have one of my brothers just graduated from college, and I think he's in that kind of like, okay, and now what do I do? And it's like, well, like you got to get a job and you got to, start on this career and you got to do these other things. And, just you have to just decide and start figuring it out.
And much of it isn't even fun. Like every day you have to make dinner. Like,
Exactly.
there's just
Like,
endless tasks.
do you enjoy unloading the dishwasher? Well, too bad. You still have to do it. Do you enjoy folding laundry? Well, that's part of it,
Good welcome. This is the freedom you've earned, which is now
Totally.
anxiety.
Yeah, the endless, like, tedious tasks, and then scheduling the tedious tasks around, like, required things like work, and then it like, well, I might have an hour a day where I could do something I enjoy. You know?
Yeah, and God forbid you have kids, because then you don't have it. You're minus
Oh, for
2 hours
real.
a day.
It's like, good luck. You won't be enjoying things for, like, 15 years.
No, no. One of my favorite scenes in this is the scene where they're at the beach and you have to do the like how many bullets have been shot from the gun to realize what's going on. There's just somebody walking up behind them and you're like, "Oh yeah, it looks like a girl. There's like 5 people here." And then you keep going around and you're like, "Wait, that's too many people for this scene."
Yep. Yeah. That's I love, to me that was what was so cool about like the scariness of this, is that it is just kind of, hey, you're calmly hanging out and like it seems like someone's approaching, but are they? And like, is that someone we know? I can't tell from here. Let me see if when they get a little closer, but then you're also like, I don't want them to get a little closer because the closer they get, the closer they are to getting me. So yeah, I really liked. I loved the idea of, like, you're at like the grocery store and it seems like someone's walking toward you, but are they, or are they actually just walking toward the potatoes behind you or something, So yeah, I loved that.
So relatable. Like
Hmm.
my brother and I and my sister have a thing about zombies, and we constantly are like, "Remember, if you're being chased by zombies in a zombie world, I need you to talk a lot and move your arms around in a way that lets me know you're not another zombie coming
Yeah,
at us."
exactly. I need you to be very clear that you are not a zombie because we are surrounded by zombies.
This is the one time I need you to really articulate your words.
Yeah. Yeah, that idea that everybody's just kind of milling around and doing their life, and so too could this thing that's going to kill you just be kind of meandering towards you slowly. I
Mhm.
love that. It's like the concept of, like a Jason Voorhees with a knife in your house is like way less scary to me than just like you could be at the mall and someone could be following you. you know?
Yes. Well, in the final mention from Dostoevsky's The Idiot, which is a wonderful book basically about the idea of how true ignorance is bliss and these characters are so, innocent, that character is reading a line from her shell phone about the inevitability of death and how it really does come for us all, which is how we
Mhm.
describe it. So this is a universal fear that you will have to someday look at. It might be sooner than later for other people, but like someday it comes for you.
Totally. And that ties in too with that kind of not a teenager, not an adult thing. Cause I feel like when you are maybe like between
Mm.
18 and 25 is when you're the most like, death, that's a million years away, you know?
Mhm.
And then the older you get, the more you're like, oh, that's a real thing maybe you have where you've lost your grandparents or your pets or something along those lines. And it's like, oh, that's a real thing that happens. And you do kind of, as you get older, start to get to where you just go, yeah, that's part of it. But yeah, when you are a kid, it's very like, well, we'll do anything to avoid this because there's got to be some sort of cheat. There's got to be some sort of way around this, right? And
Mhm.
then as you get older, you're like, nope, like this is just, it is what it is, you know?
And these stress dreams of having something inexorably coming after you are representations of something that you're avoiding in your life and something that's giving you anxiety that you don't want to look at. And our own
Hmm.
mortality, yes, I think that's really great. I didn't even think of that. Like we're in a transitionary period where you have to start to admit you might not be immortal. And those of
Hmm.
us who have suffered trauma are going to lose our innocence sooner than others.
Yeah. When you, I mean, I remember there was some, I can't remember which comedian it was, but was doing a thing about, you get a dog for your kids because it's like practice for grandma, like it's
Yeah.
like, yes, like, that when you have a pet, like it's not going to live as long as you. And it's kind of like, this is to teach children, like, this is a part of it. We love our cat and our cat's gone now. We love our goldfish and our goldfish is gone now. And someday you're going to love, your parents and your parents are going to be gone now, so it's kind of like, it's that easing into the acceptance that this is a part of life.
There is a very controversial episode of David the Gnome, which is a Swedish television show for children that aired on Nickelodeon when we were children.
Uh-huh.
They often do not air the last episode, but they did once, in
Uh-huh.
which they wanted to teach children about death. This was important. It's part of Swedish culture. It was not that weird there. But they
Hmm.
have David die. And there's a line, it just abruptly happens, where they say, David, now reaching his 500th birthday, must go into the woods, as all gnomes do, to die. And then you watch him say goodbye to everybody. And there's like this really sad separation, but you watch the characters go on afterwards and they can still continue to live healthy lives. And like,
Hmm.
I'm talking like television show for 5-year-olds.
Yeah, it's like that's such a powerful thing. I feel like we do. Other cultures are so much more like, well, yes, this is the thing that happens. I feel like here we're like, nobody ever dies and everything's wonderful, kids. Let's never talk about this. I don't want to try to figure out how to explain this to you.
Don't you dare kill anybody in Harry Potter.
Yeah, exactly.
It's too much.
It's so true. It's like we don't want to traumatize kids. It's like, did no one watch Bambi when they were a kid?
Dude, even just the beginning of Oliver, the one about the
Yeah,
cats, where, like, it's
seriously.
washing them away and no one will adi like, the beginning of Up, like,
Yeah,
ah.
seriously. It's like it's okay. Kids can feel feelings when they're watching something. It's all right.
It's important, in fact.
Yeah.
So this movie reminds me a lot of a very common Reddit meme you may or may not have heard of called the assassin snail. Are you familiar with this?
I don't think I am.
You can get $1 million and you will be made immortal. But you're going to be followed by an immortal snail. He always knows where you are, and if he can touch you, you will die. Would you take the bet? And if so, what would you do?
That's great. I feel like, that is the inherent march of death of like it's like it might be slow, it might be whatever, it might just be a snail, but you're not getting out of this one.
At least you got the $1,000,000. Just keep moving,
Exactly.
son of a
Might
bitch.
as well take the $1,000,000 and have a good time before the snail gets you.
Exactly. So, as we approach the end of this episode, I do like to ask people pretty much the same two questions. We did kind of approach this question at the beginning, which was, did you like the film?
I did. I did like it. I think it felt like it was really well made. I appreciate things that are intentional. I appreciated all the kind of layers to it. Yeah, I liked it.
Nice score of what's your letterbox score for it?
I don't know if I rated it yet on Letterboxd, but I probably should. I would say like I'm probably at like a 3.5 to 4, somewhere in that range for it.
That's
So
nice,
yeah.
nice.
Yeah.
Do you often rate every movie you see on Letterboxd, like right away or later on? Or you?
Sometimes later on, usually I'll kind of like, if I feel really strongly about it at the time, sometimes I'll give it a rating, but then inevitably sometimes I'll go back and be like, wait, no, I want to like add a half a star or take a half a star away or something like that. A friend of mine was joking that there needs to be like a 3.75 rating on Letterboxd where you're like, I can't, it's like, it's not a 3.5. It's better than a 3.5, but I'm not going to put it at a 4. And it's like, we get into these really weird nuance where it's like, okay, I want to give it like 3.84,
I would argue for a 2.75 deeply. It's not a 2.5. It's
Totally.
not terrible, but it really isn't
Exactly.
a 3, guys.
It's so true. It's like, how can I do, if I do like a 2.5 and a like, that kind of counts. If I do like a 3.5 and a like, then it's like, yeah, it's 3.5, but like, it's like a really good 3.5.
I don't know. But sometimes I'm like, I don't want to lay it on thick here. It's a,
Yeah,
it's a
totally.
3, no like.
Yeah, exactly. If it's like a 3, but no like, it's like, well, it was fine, but I'm not going to watch it again,
I can see why people might like it.
Yeah, I need like a key for like understanding what any of these mean. And then inevitably it will just depend on the movie. I'll have something where I'm like, pretty good, 3. Then I'll have something else where I'm like, terrible, 3. Like, so it's just like, it could mean anything. At this point, you just got to ask me about it.
And I have installed on myself kind of like Google drunk glasses, which is you can make Google not let you send emails between certain times of day unless you can answer a complicated math question to keep you from drunk emailing people.
Nice.
I will not allow myself to letterbox a movie unless it has been 24 hours.
It's a good idea for sure. It's a really good idea.
I'll fly off the handle.
Yeah, a lot of the things where I'll come out of the theater and I have like one opinion about it, and then as I'm working on my review, I'll be like, well, that's true. That wasn't that great. Or I'll be like, yeah, now that I think about it, that was awesome. And so I tend to like when my review goes out is when I'll tend to put the star rating in there. But even then, like I'm like, look at the review, because that'll give you, I need more than just this number. I need like to be able to say paragraphs about this.
Oh my God, yeah. I don't like to. Sometimes I will do a star review without a letter or without explaining why, but I have to also explain why because like sometimes I'll be flying off the handle and I'll just be like yelling at myself, being like, why did they fucking do this? And then they did that. And then the only reason that anyone would fucking do that is because, oh, fuck, that's why. And like,
Yeah.
I'll walk myself to the answer and then I'll get to sit down and stop yelling about the movie.
Completely. Or there'll be something where it's like, I'll rate it really high. And it's like, look, for me, this movie's 5 stars, but I just want to put a disclaimer that like for anyone else, you guys are going to think this is like maybe a 3 at best. But for me personally, it's a 5.
My review of The Last Unicorn starts with this sentence: I am not a reliable rater on this film. 5 stars.
Exactly. It's like I have so many things where there'll be like a nostalgia reason, or there's like this actor that I love that gave a performance that I love in a movie that's not that great or whatever. And I have to try to be like, okay, look, over the past like 6 years, I've been following this person's career and I've seen this thing. And so if you have the previous 6 years of knowledge that I have, you would also think this movie's 5 stars. But if you're just like a friend of mine on Letterboxd who's seeing this review, don't assume this is going to be the best movie you've ever seen. It's like, you need a lot of context for this.
If you don't also own an old VHS version of this where certain scenes are no longer playable because they've been worn out, you might not like it.
Exactly. It's like if you didn't, write this one line in your friend's high school yearbook, you're not going to care,
Yes, my husband is kind of that way with Johnny Dangerously, which I do love that movie, but so much of it gets quoted out of context that we often like, is that even a line from that movie anymore? I've forgotten.
Those quotable lines where you're like, look, I quote this all the time. For that reason, I love this movie, but it's not a great movie. But for me, for my personal references and my like friend group who says this a lot, it's a great movie.
Yes, you have to be part of my friend group that calls Ninja Scrolls ninja squirrels because we misheard it once and like
Exactly. It's like you got to be so far deep into the like, reference pool to be able to get this that it's like, whatever. Just the point is, I love it. It's not that great for everybody else, like.
Exactly. All right. My second question for you is,
Mhm.
would you recommend this to other people? And maybe if not, are there caveats where like I wouldn't recommend this to obviously children, but
Yeah, I think for sure. I think like, like I'm not a big horror movie person, but I think people who are not big horror movie people, this is a good one for sure. I think if you're kind of like a film type of person, this is a good one to watch. I mean, if you're like the horror movies you want to see are like the jump scary kind of like eighth in a franchise, and every 2 minutes there's a jump scare and there's whatever. Like this may not be. You may be like, oh, it was boring. So I think you can kind of tell those people where it's like, what are they looking for in like a movie like this? And if you're looking for like a cinematic kind of experience, I think this very much fits that bill.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I completely agree. I think there is an audience member for whom this could be boring.
Hmm.
I more often than there is an audience member for whom this would be too terrifying,
Hmm.
which is
Hmm.
part of the reason why I picked it for you. We had almost gone with The Fly, and I was like, I wonder if I can get something that's body horror but not as graphic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
some argue that this film isn't totally body horror, but I feel like body horror has a lot to do with a loss of autonomy and a fear of
Hmm.
your own. I mean, that scene where she's looking at her own body in the window and like
Hmm.
how palpable that is. Oh, and that stupid little shit kid that's following her everywhere. Again, like this is a thing that women have. Yes, there is the thing that's following her, but there's also the neighborhood kids who are constantly following her.
Totally. Yeah, I love the idea of body horror is not necessarily like your own body, but society's reflection on your body.
Mhm. Delicious.
It's great.
But yeah, there is definitely an audience member for whom that like that's too pretentious. I really want to see Jason 7. And there's nothing, and I'm not saying that in a
Yeah.
derogatory way. Like that's just a
You
different
can
audience
love both
member.
things. Yeah, you can like
Yeah.
sort of popcorn movies and, heavier movies. I mean,
Mhm.
like that's
Mhm.
that's the nice thing about movies in general is like you can just pick and choose what you like, and you can watch something that's a shut your brain off. I just want to watch, interesting kills or whatever, or you can watch something that's going to have layered sort of metaphors and all sorts of things where you can really be thinking about it after. So
Oh, yeah, and sometimes you need a palate cleanser after those thoughtful movies.
yeah, you can watch something that's like way heavier and then you can turn around and be like, all right, I need to turn my brain off and watch like a big blockbuster thing now. And that's totally fine to do. Doesn't have to be one or the other.
Do you have a comfort watch that you normally go for, a television show or movie?
I feel like I end up like, I can always tell how stressed out I am at work by whether or not I've watched like an SS Rajamouli movie. So like I'll watch RRR or
Yeah.
Baahubali, like all that stuff. And it's like if that shows up on my letterbox as like a recently watched, it's like rough week, huh? Watching Baahubali for like the 27th time. Tough week, yeah. Not a great time at work.
Cry for help.
Yeah, seriously. People can tell like immediately by like, have I watched these various Indian movies that bring me so much joy where I can just sort of be like, I'm going to disappear into the mythical world of this film now. And, or like, Lord of the Rings. It's like, if I'm watching Lord of
Mhm.
the Rings, it's like, oh, it's been a tough week. She's watching Lord of the Rings again. She's like, she's mentally, she's in, Rivendell or whatever. Like she's
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's why we seek out fantasy. That is the number one reason.
for sure. So it's like,
Oh,
yep, you
great.
can immediately you can know what kind of week I'm having by what's on my recently watched.
Alright, well, I'll keep an eye out for you
Yeah.
now. If I see that, I'll send you a message and be like,
Be
"Are
like,
you
hey, how
okay?"
you doing? Yeah, exactly. How about you? What's your comfort watch?
Oh, man, if I go for a comfort watch movie, it's kind of weird how this is the answer that I always have. It's Tombstone. For
Oh,
some
nice.
reason, I can watch Tombstone over and over and over and over and over again, and every time I watch it, I'm just like, doesn't matter where it starts. I mean, I think that's because the country music channel had it on all the time, and I would watch it that way.
Yes. I have so many like that where it's a thing where it just used to play on cable a lot. So you end up watching it because it's like, well, it was always on. So like, just put it on. It was always on. It doesn't really matter. Like I could start it. I could fast forward through it, whatever. It's like, yeah, you want that same experience of just turning it on and it's like halfway through the movie. But now with streaming, it's like, oh, it just starts at the beginning. So you're like, just fast forward in a little bit and start it from there.
I wish there was a randomization setting where I could be like, start somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Just, I'm going to hit play. You just pick a spot, algorithm, and just start going from there.
Let's do it. And because I think that it's something I watched when I was younger, it hits that like nostalgia factor that I'm going for. But I also do put on Bob's Burgers a lot.
Nice.
Whenever I've just watched something very scary, I'm like, and before we go to bed, we're going to feed the brain a little Bob's Burgers.
Completely.
So we don't mess up our dreams.
So true. It's like, okay, well, that was something that's like horrifying. And I'm going to be thinking about this like horrible scenario. But it's like, but I could pop on Death Becomes Her real quick, you know?
You can't go to bed if the last thing that you heard was a true crime documentary being like, and they never found the killer. Like, no, God, no.
Exactly. You need a little buffer between that and going to sleep.
Oh, man. So any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
No, this was great. It was, I love, getting recommendations of things and being able to check them out and seeing stuff that other people are into and recommending stuff to people. Like this is one of the things I love about kind of like movie TikTok or just movie social media in general right now is that like something like Letterboxd. I mean, I've discovered so many movies through there just because it'll be something that my friends put up and wrote a review for. And I love that we're in an era where there is kind of like the movie social network and you can suddenly discover all these new things and find out, oh, my friend saw this at this film festival. And when it eventually gets to where I can see it, that's on my list and I definitely want to check it out. So I totally vibe with this kind of thing of like, let me recommend this for you. That's the thing that I think is missing the most from the video store is like the idea of the employee picks or whatever. You know, you don't get the staff picks. And I love the idea that we kind of do. We sort of have carved out a little niche with Letterboxd and, Threads and Instagram and TikTok where we can kind of have that experience. It's just not exactly the same as going, yeah, that one person at the video store really has similar taste to me,
Yes. Oh my God. When you find one of those video stores, it's so exciting to be like,
sure.
I may not have ever even met Noah, but I know that when it says Noah's picks, I'm getting it.
Exactly. I feel like that was so many of the people that are like the film TikTok people where I'll have some movie I've never even heard of and someone that, like we follow or whatever will recommend it. And I'm like, I gotta check this out. And then I'll watch it and absolutely love it. So there are some benefits to social media. It's all not just destroying democracy and making everyone have eating disorders.
And fucking up cable television.
Exactly.
Yeah, I have a list on my Letterboxd of just collected 5-star reviews of people I like. So there's movies I haven't seen, but my watch list consists of, so like if you don't know what to watch, Katie, just randomly pick any of the movies on this list are supposed to be 5-star from people you trust.
Yeah.
Stop searching Netflix, for fuck's sake, watch a movie.
Exactly. Stop the endless scroll and just pick something that one of your friends liked. And even if you hate it, you could have a really interesting conversation with somebody about, so what was it that you liked about this?
Exactly. I loved your idea of a dating app aspect to Letterboxd because that would have saved me. I'm married now, but it would have saved me so much trouble when I was dating, hanging out with a guy and being like, yeah, I really want to watch this Tarsem Singh movie. And they're like, no, I really love Michael Mann's Transformers. And I'm like, we can't meet in the middle of that.
Exactly.
Goodbye.
It's like if the 4 faves don't align, like they don't have to be the same 4 faves, but they need to be where there's like some kind of common theme or some kind of thing to tie them together. Like the 4 faves are really like, that is how you tell compatibility.
Yes. I mean, you don't have to love anime, but I do have an anime in my top 4. So if you're going to come out the gate with like, I don't ever watch anime, you're going to have to leave.
Totally. If you're the kind of person who's like subtitled movies, it's like, okay, we're going to have a problem.
Absolute fucking problem. I will always be polite and be like, is it okay for subtitles? But within the last 5 years, I have not met a single person who isn't like, oh yes, please subtitles.
Completely. It's like I'm not saying I'm going to judge you, but I am going to judge you. That's what sucks so bad too, is when like the whole point is that you watch the thing. And then when you have people that are like coming up with excuses and you want to be like, oh, okay, so I got to watch your thing, but you just feel like you can just opt out for mine, like just watch it. You don't know, just watch it,
Fine. You'll be fine.
It's like it's a couple hours of your day. If you hate it, you don't ever have to watch it again. It's really not the end of the world.
That's what this show is all about. What if
exactly.
you don't like it?
Exactly. It's like I've sat through some real shit in terms of like going to screenings or things that I've had to review or whatever. And it's like, there's been a lot of things where you're kind of like, well, the lighting was really great. Like,
I have been in some shit where I have to be like, the lighting was fine.
Exactly. You're trying to find something to compliment about it so you're not just shitting on it the whole time. But it's like, and even if it is, like Babylon is a great example. Like I hated Babylon. I have so many friends that love that movie. And it's like, I'm not like, what's wrong with you? I'm like, explain to me why you loved it. I'll explain to you why I hated it. And we'll just come to common ground of like, wow, we fell on different sides of this,
And that's part of what I think might be the unique space that I'm creating with this podcast, where I bring people on and I'm like, it's okay to not like it.
Yeah.
You can talk to me all about why you don't like it before you even watch it, versus like having two people who just straight up disagree doing a podcast together and yelling at each other. This is more of a like, well, let's see, let's examine. Did that work? Did that not work? Why? I love knowing why stuff didn't work.
That's the most important part to me. It's like there'll be a movie where, like I'll see on Letterboxd my friends, I'll have one friend that gave it a 5, one friend that gave it a 0.5 star. And I'm like, oh, this is fascinating. Like, I can't wait to see what both of them said about it, because clearly like they watched the same movie. They fell on completely different sides of the story. And I'm very curious to see what it was that made them feel that way.
Yeah.
That's the best part.
Or even when you get that friend that everybody thinks they know what they're going to rate it as, and they give it a good review or a bad review you didn't expect.
For sure.
And you're like, oh, shit, Eileen Jones liked Romulus?
Yeah.
What?
Yes. Or that friend where you're like, oh, man, can't wait till so-and-so sees this. They're going to fucking love it. And then they give it like a 2.5, and you're like, what? Like, what happened here? This feels like the most you movie ever,
My sister has kind of coined this term. She does it to people and she doesn't know. I've coined it for her. Mm-hmm. She watches a movie that's very, very bad and she doesn't know how to handle it. So she recommends it to another person so that she can kind of ringu them. She's the bad experience.
She's doing the It Follows, but for bad movies.
It's literally why. Yes. And so sometimes I come to these people and you're like, and I'll do this to my friends too. I will be like, you have to see Longlegs. And the reason why is because I want to bitch with you. I need to bitch with you. I need it so bad. But I know you're not going to see it if I tell you it's bad.
Exactly. Same. There'll be stuff where it's like, well, it's really an experience, especially like if I see something before it really comes out. And then I'm like, well, I can't tell you spoilers, but like, boy, I had some thoughts about this. And when the embargo lifts, you'll find out what my thoughts were.
Exactly. I don't want to ruin what the CGI in Romulus was that was bad.
Yeah,
but it was bad.
It's like, I don't want to tell you that there was like a weird CGI resurrected corpse of a beloved actor, but you should know that there's going to be some CGI in here that you're going to be pretty horrified by, probably.
Yeah. The ethical implications will not even be close to the sheer fact that they completely failed on a technological level.
For real. It's like, I want to know what screening you're going to so I can know like, okay, they went in 6:45. So in a couple hours, I'm going to get a text from them that's like, what the fuck was that?
I'm literally teaching some of my younger friends what clutch cargo lips are so that they know how to describe what they've seen.
Seriously. It's like, oh God. Yeah, for sure.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and taking a chance on a movie that you might not have liked and really being super thoughtful, super interesting to talk to. This was an absolute pleasure.
Well, I have had the best time. And I feel like, every time I chat with you about movies, I'm like, this is so great. So
yes. And editing part 1, I was like, this is so fun.
Totally. That was same when you were on my podcast and I was editing it. I was like, oh my God, I love what she said here. This was so awesome. This was so good. And you're just like, I don't even know what to clip. It's all great.
Yes. Oh, good. So again, if you're listening to this and you're feeling that vibe off of this episode, you can go to trashwire.com and get more of Alexis and also get more of another episode we did together about MPAA ratings. Just another reminder of that great content that awaits you on trashwire.com.
Well, thank you so much for the plug.
I need water. Oh my God, I need water.
Okay, I'll get you some.
No, stay here. Is something wrong with me?
Look, somebody broke the window. That really happened.
But I saw a girl in the kitchen.
Jay, I love you.
You're okay.
Welcome to Corrections and Omissions. This is the part of the show where we pick up any loose threads or slack or anything that we might have asked in other parts of the show, but we didn't want to stop dead and just, Google so you can hear our clicking keyboards to get you the answer, but I still want to get you the answer. And sometimes we say the wrong thing. People misspeak. It happens all the time. I just want to make sure we get you the most accurate information we can. And in fact, with this one, we're going to start out with something I said that was wrong. I said, never give a Gribnitz to a moil. It should be never take a Gribnitz from a moil. It's actually never buy Gribnitz from a moil. And while there is a moil in Robin Hood, and it is played by Mel Brooks, that line is actually from Mrs. Doubtfire. During the scene where they're trying different looks on Robin's character, before they fall on the look that you're thinking of in your head when I say Mrs. Doubtfire right now, there's one that looks like an extra from Fiddler on the Roof. It's shot about shoulder, head, tight in. She looks right at the camera and says, "Never buy Gribnitz from a moil." For those of you who are curious and don't know, Gribnitz or Griven is a dish consisting of crisp chicken or goose skin cracklings with fried onions. A moil is a Jewish man trained in the practice of Brit Milah, the covenant of male circumcision. The rest of the joke is up to you, my gentle listener, to construe. Oof, I'm wrong again in part 1. This is a good episode for me. The 1976 Stevie Wonder album is Songs in the Key of Life, not Songs in the Key of G. That's actually a book where, in his honest and heartfelt words, Kenny G, aka Kenneth Gorlick, a man who takes his music seriously but himself not so seriously, lets listeners behind the scenes to see how he creates his unique sound and unforgettable songs. Along the way, he offers life lessons in discipline, determination, and dedication. You guys, the description for this is hilarious. I mean, he says right in the description that he does not take himself very seriously because it ends with the following quote. As Kenny G likes to say, "Try it. You'll have the best sax you ever had." When did Cinemark stop issuing coupons for turning your phone on silent? This was called Cinemode, and it lasted 6 years as part of Cinemark's phone app from November 1st of 2012 until November 1st of 2018. On December 31st of 2018, points earned before 2018 expired, and in 2019, all the points that were made from Cinemode were gone. Assuming you stayed in Cinemode for the duration of the movie, you could earn a reward each time you saw a movie. For example, you could get a free drink when you bought a popcorn. It was pretty damn awesome, and I genuinely wish that they would bring it back. Randonautica is an app that gives you a random location where there's supposed to be high energy, high energy, that's usually around where I am, or mysterious energy. All that kind of, like spooky, weird stuff, like go here and find maybe a liminal space or fall in between that space between 3:05 and 3:10 in the morning. However, when these teens went to this location that the Randonautica app gave them, it told them to go to a place where they found a briefcase stuffed with 2 dead bodies. Actually, I think it might have been a suitcase. Anyway, they recorded the whole thing, posted it to TikTok, and the cops came. There was a whole case. The reason I was having trouble finding information and had to take that kind of weird note that wound up being my own National Treasure decoding thing was because the parents of the deceased are really upset about the attention that their children's death gets because of the app's association. To date, there has been absolutely no connection, and the app just really genuinely coincidentally pointed these people to this location. The person who committed the murders has been apprehended, their motive is known, it was not spooky, and they have been sentenced to 46 years in prison. With respect to the deceased, I offer my deepest condolences to them and their family, and I will end this at that point. Did you know that Micah Monroe is a professional freestyle kiteboarder? Micah Monroe, which is actually not her first name, she was born Dylan Monroe Buckley, but changed her name at a young age. Quote, "When I was about 7 years old, I asked my mom the other name she was going to name me, and she said Micah was her second choice. Turns out, Micah preferred that to Dylan, and so she switched her name." But back to kiteboarding. In 2013, Monroe was ranked number 32 in the world as a professional freestyle kiteboarder. She started when she was 13. Quote, "I saw my dad doing it, and I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen." At age 17, Monroe and her mother moved from Santa Barbara in California to Cabaret in the Dominican Republic so she could train. She subsequently completed her senior year of high school entirely online. 2 years later, she would make her acting debut as Cadence Farrow in the 2012 drama At Any Price, starring Dennis Quaid and Zac Efron. Richard Vierlin, better known by his stage name Disasterpiece, is a Staten Island-born American composer and musician, and he did the soundtrack for this film, It Follows. We talked about how important the soundtrack was. We talked about how much we loved it. And yet I never once said his name or his stage name. And I'm so sorry for that because it's a pretty interesting person. He's done a lot of cool stuff. Disasterpiece recorded the score for this film because the director, David Robert Mitchell, was a huge fan of the video game Fez from 2012, which Disasterpiece did the music for. He also was the composer for Marcel the Shell with Shoes On. Wow, I didn't know that at all. As well as Bodies, 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 and just one episode of Adventure Time called Bad Jubies, in which Finn, Jake, Bimmo, and Lumpy Space Princess must build a bunker to survive a deadly storm that hits the grasslands. Jake eventually calms the storm by beatboxing to nature sounds he has collected. You can find a link to the songs from Bad Jubies off of Disasterpiece's Bandcamp in the liner notes. Worth enjoying. What was the name of the movie that the kids were watching that I spoke about having the allusion to the pool scene in it? It happens at about minute 6, and it's called Killers from Space. It's from 1954. Early in the film, this is when Jay's friends are watching a movie on the old TV, and you can hear the following lines from the movie very loud, very clear. And of course, if you're watching it like Alexis and I did, you've got those subtitles on. You're gonna see and read this. Quote, "You're afraid of an overload. You can't tap enough electricity wherever you get it from to control a strong enough charge." Later on in the film, when Jay's friends plan to electrocute the monster following us, it turns out that they can't tap enough electricity to get a strong enough charge, and the plan fails. And it turns out that it was foreshadowing, like I said. All of the diegetic background television and music is pretty much doing that for you in this movie. I spoke for a hot minute about how video games can help people with PTSD, and I deeply encourage you, if that speaks to you in any kind of way, go out there, research that much further than what I'm going to tell you right now. There's a lot of different options out there for people, but just a broad stroke here, you can see this being put into use. There's a program called Brave Mind, which is virtual reality therapy to combat PTSD in veterans. That's being used very successfully. There have also been studies specifically on Bejeweled 2, saying that stress-related medical disorders cause larger disorders like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, depression, serious medical conditions that can cause disability, inability to work, eventually death if it's cardiovascular, definitely. And they have found that playing casual video games, CVGs, like Bejeweled 2, which are fun, easy to play, spontaneous, tremendously popular. Who amongst us doesn't know someone who's always trying to invite you to play Candy Crush? Or back when Facebook first started, I knew when all of this was just farmland, and people kept inviting me to their farmland. However, studies have shown, the study that I'm specifically citing right now is from 2009, so there have been a lot more studies into it, I'm sure. So they tested people playing Bejeweled 2 with electroencephalography machines, which is so hard to say. You know why they call them EEG machines instead of trying to say that. And they found that the people playing Bejeweled 2 had consistently increased moods and had measurably increased moods, and this kind of information was corroborated with, a psychological report. So they had people sit down with them and talk to them. How are you feeling? What's it like? And they also tested their heart rate variability, and it stayed pretty consistent with relaxed and decreased physical states. So it was therefore concluded that playing casual video games like Bejeweled 2 can increase your mood and decrease stress. So what does that mean? There are really broad implications to this. Potentially, we could develop a prescriptive intervention using Bejeweled 2 to prevent and treat stress-related medical disorders. This is pretty crazy. You have to stay home from work today and make sure you get in at least 2 hours of Bejeweled 2. I mentioned that the Brave Little Toaster premiered at Cannes. Not quite right. It did premiere at a very prestigious film festival. It wasn't Cannes, it was Sundance. Another correction on me today. Womp womp. The Brave Little Toaster very nearly took home the top award, the Grand Jury Prize, at the 1988 Sundance Film Festival. According to director Jerry Reese, who maintained in later years that he was told the only reason the Brave Little Toaster did not get this award was because they felt it might possibly dilute the festival's prestige, internationally. And so that was what kept it from serious consideration for the grand prize. Again, I can't find any citation on this being corroborated by anyone except for Jerry Reese telling people this in stories and interviews. The film did receive a special citation from the jury at the festival's award ceremony in 1988, but it would be 13 years until another animated film would play at Sundance, when in 2001, Richard Linklater's Waking Life would play. A bit of a different target audience than the Brave Little Toaster, but still equally philosophical. Well, hot damn, I've got another correction for myself. I am on fire this episode. I said that David the Gnome was Swedish. I know why I did this. It's because I'm confusing the television show with the children's book series, The Secret Book of Gnomes by Dutch author Wil Huygen and illustrator Rien Purchevlet. You go look at how those names are spelled and tell me you can say them better. And yes, I know that the Netherlands are not Sweden, but it is a little closer to mistake a Dutch culture thing for a Swedish culture thing than where the show David the Gnome, the animated show, actually comes from. It's from Spain. It was originally in Spanish. David the Gnome dies in the final episode of the Spanish animated series, The World of David the Gnome. The episode, number 26, titled The Mountains of Beyond. In this episode, David and Lisa travel to the mountains to die because gnomes only live up to, I said 500, it's 400 years old. In the episode, David and Lisa say goodbye to their friends and ascend the mountain. Their bodies are turned into apple trees. You see this happen while you're watching it. It's not painful. It's supposed to be beautiful. Casper, also their friend, turns into an oak tree. Swift meets Christopher, another gnome, and Agnes, a female fox. So Swift is David the Gnome's fox friend. So you see him have this sad goodbye, but you also see him move on and meet a friend and another gnome. And then it ends with Christopher and the spirits of the dead gnomes waving goodbye. This originally aired April 19th of 1986 in Spain, but it aired in the United States on Nickelodeon February 8th, 1988, a very special day for me and my sister because that was when our innocence died. Which comedian does the joke about getting a dog for your kids so they can practice for when their grandmother dies? This was Louis C.K. The joke was made part of his live stand-up album called Live at Madison Square Garden from 2015. Where does he come up with the names for his albums? In it, he tells some stories about death, a favorite subject of his, describing the passing of a family dog as, quote, a dry run for grandma, so that when she goes, you can simply remind the kids about what happened with the dog and say, yeah, so grandma now. And finally, are there staff picks for films anymore? There was a hot minute 2 years ago when Netflix was testing a staff pick section for recommendations, but it didn't make a full rollout to all users, and it died in beta. However, IMDb does offer staff pick lists monthly, and you can go find the most current one in the liner notes to this show. Letterboxd also does good lists, and the people from Criterion have their staff picks listed on there. So some options still exist, but none are quite as fun and personable as our local video clerks ones. And that's it. This is the very, very end of the show. You have made it. Now it's time for the reminder of the plugs. Of course, you can go to trashwire.com and see everything that Alexis has got out, the MPAA ratings, history that we did together, and so much more wonderful content, reviews, suggestions. Just go there, check it out. You can also go to their social, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, follow them. It's going to be Trashwire on all of those things, and this is all going to be in the liner notes. I will be joining Movie Night Extravaganza as a permanent host starting this coming Tuesday, and we're going to be doing Ravenous, a movie that has so much meaning to me and part of why I wanted to make movies, specifically horror movies. I even reference it in my first ever movie, Girl in the Basement, which you can see by going to the liner notes. So do join us on Tuesday. It's going to be at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, live on YouTube, but you can also get it archived if you're not available at that time and still listen to it later. It's a really important movie to me, and I highly recommend that you check it out. I forgot to mention this at the top. I didn't realize it was going to come out the same day as this does, which is really exciting. I spoke with Jason Entertainment on YouTube about Romulus, my feelings towards it, and I talk a little bit about the Romulus-Remus myth and why that really helped elevate this film for me and added to my enjoyability. You'll find that by going to my social media. It's not going to be in the liner notes because it has not yet been published at the time of me recording this, so I can't include it in this one. It'll be included in the next episode, of course. But if you follow me on social media, you know I'm going to let you know where it is and when it is and how you can see it. Follow me, Movie Runtime, on TikTok. Movie Runtime, also on Instagram because it's my backup account. Gonna get you to Little Deadly Creature. I'm not gonna change it. I'm sorry. I just love Little Deadly Creature. That has been my Instagram name for forever, and I'm gonna stick with it. Part of it being that Little Creature, LC, like Elsie, is another 2-letter name like KT, and it's a pseudonym for me. So we're sticking with it. But Movie Runtime on TikTok, Movie Runtime on YouTube, Movie Runtime on Instagram will get you there too. I'm not really on Facebook. Don't bother with Facebook. That's going to be it. We're going to wrap this up. Again, such a wonderful time to get to have Alexis on here. I find that when we have women come on to discuss horror, we wind up having really thoughtful, really deep and interesting conversations. So, there's going to be more of this soon. As always, thank you so much for making it to the very, very end. And here's your reward, the theme song that I made up to play again. This has been What If I Don't Like It with your host, KT Baldassaro. See you later, Space Cowboy.